Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
When it comes to politics, especially in this day and age, it simply makes no sense to put all of our eggs in one political basket. The days of our union being viewed as a handmaid for one political party or the pawn in somebody else's political game must come to an end.
North American Building Trades President Sean McGarvey. McGarvey delivered the keynote speech of the Building Trades 2015 Legislative Conference Monday here in Washington, D.C. McGarvey's message was to think more strategically when it comes to politics and internal mobilization of building trades union members. He says building trades members are split roughly 60-40 between Democrats and Republicans, and the American political reality is purple, tinged with red.
Brothers and sisters, all I'm saying is it's time for us to start playing a new game. And we can't do this overnight. But 10 years from now, the economic well-being of our members should no longer be dependent on who occupies the White House, a governor's mansion, a state legislature, or the United States Congress, because we have constructed building trades majorities at all levels of government.
McGarvey says the building trades are not climate change deniers, despite sometimes being on the opposite side of issues with the environmental movement.
And let me be clear, when it comes to the building trades and the environment, first off, we are not climate change deniers. Our unions have consistently been in favor of a balanced region global solution that puts us on a path to address the serious nature of climate change, but does so in a manner that does not destroy the American middle class and the ability of our members to ply their crafts.
McGarvey says the building trades are on a positive trajectory, having added 53,000 members in 2014. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers says that its efforts to organize the South Carolina Boeing plant are far from over, despite the union's withdrawal of a petition for an April 22nd union election. The IAM says two of its organizers were threatened at gunpoint during worker home visits. The union also cited a toxic environment and gross violations of workers' rights as the reasons that it's postponing an election. The IAM says Boeing's campaign of rumors and threats may have succeeded in delaying the union election, but the fight to win collective bargaining rights for thousands of Boeing South Carolina workers is far from over.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, health care, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they're still right on. Oh, and this time is my time. All right, love or hate, it don't matter. I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots to talk about. Couple of labor wonks, a couple of economists on the program telling us how we change that inequality thing, and maybe, just maybe, how we make sure that retirement security is going to be there when those of us who are like 20 years away from retirement actually get there. Because regardless, 20 years from now, we're going to be somewhere. The question is, will we be able to retire The oligarchs, the wealth class, the billionaires, I don't think they want us retiring. I think they want people working until they drop. And the question is where are you? I mean, in any of what we talk about, it's which side are you on? Right now, we're choosing up sides, I guess. Are you on the billionaire side? Because, hey, we'd all like to be billionaires, right? I'd like to be wildly wealthy and not have to worry about, where the next week's paycheck's going to come from. But the reality is the vast majority of us are not going to be that. So what policies as a nation do we pursue? What agenda do we pursue? And I think that's the important conversation. Not being had. Not at all being had. In fact, where the war is being, and I just had this conversation just 10 minutes before going on air. The war is not waged over how do we make a society where people can work hard, play by the rules, and get ahead. How do we make a society where work is rewarded and family structure and all that stuff is important? It's not. And you could talk about the godless heathens, and I would go, okay, well, yeah, those people on Wall Street, you're right. Absolutely. That's the cause of all of this. And, all of the solutions that you see from the right wing and the corporate class, even in the Democratic Party, is all this reliance on Wall Street, all this reliance on these gimmicks, on these games, on this shenanigans. And the reality is, until we wake up and realize that policy matters, politics matters. Who you put in that office matters. Not just because, oh, he's cute, or oh, she's got a nice smile, or oh, well, he's such a nice person. Even though his policies are destructive and horrible, he's a nice person. And sadly, we've really done this electoral thing based on, American idiot style politicking, all of the TV commercials and all of the stuff that's out there that inundate us with just utter nonsense is kind of amazing to me. What I think we need to be doing as a society is talking about really in a substantive way. How do we pursue policies, actual real choices that are going to make sure our kids get educations, our neighborhoods are safe, and that the jobs that we do and the work that we do is rewarded, and, well, we reach out and give a helping hand to those who may not be doing as well. That's not the direction the oligarchs want to take us. That's not the direction the big CEO class and their billionaire ilk want to take us. They want to continue us down the path of hooray for me and the heck with everybody else. And if you fall behind, well, Donner Party of 6. You're basically on your own. That's why these elections are so important. Now, May 19th, we've got an election. I know it's one of those weird years where there's nothing really good on the agenda, except for the people who are going to be sitting on the bench on the Supreme Court and doing all of the stuff locally. And it's just frustrating to no end, because I argue that these elections are the ones that affect our lives the most. These are the people that you put into the little county commissioners races and the little local treasurer races and the local prothonotary and the local this and that dog catcher, all of that stuff that really affect your life directly. Yet we have the lowest voter turnout. And I think it's because we've been lulled to sleep. Understand, these are very important. Every election is a very important election. Every election matters. And what's frustrating to me is I see too many of these elections going to people who have the moneyed connections. And that's what's frustrating. I mean, we're hearing an awful lot about Hillary. We're hearing an awful lot about, the different super PACs being set up, especially Hillary. And I go, well, this is a great time for the right wing to say that we need to get money out of politics. All of it. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Because, you look at these billionaires and you think they just made their money here? And what's frustrating to me to no end is every policy that you stop and I used to ask this question. I used to challenge people to call in, and I got bored of doing it, to be honest. I got bored of challenging people to call in and find me a policy that, Republicans have put forth that was signed into law that benefited working people solely. And I know that hasn't happened in 30, 40, 50 years. One piece of legislation that was solely to benefit working people. And I had a bunch of people, throw out minimum wage increase. Oh, that benefit. Yeah, the last time we raised the minimum wage, though, we sweetened it with a whole bunch of, gifts to the oligarchs. Huge tax breaks and lots of the those sweeteners that make that modest minimum wage increase more palatable for them. But every one of these things that folks came out with is, no, we don't do anything purely for we the people anymore. We've always got to pay homage to the chair. We've always got to give that, that present, that gift, the homage. You got to kiss the ring. And what's frustrating to me is it shouldn't be this way. Last time I checked, we the voters, the mass of us, we have more votes than they do. And what I love to hear is my right-wing friends say, well, democracy will end when the lazy people realize that they can vote themselves whatever they want and the producers are going to have to pay for it. Well, that hasn't ever really happened, which is kind of interesting, given the argument that the right wing makes, because I think we all have this love affair with our billionaire class. Understand, they don't have the same kind of affection for us. And as I've always said, if you're not seated at the table, you're probably on the menu. And today we're going to talk with with a reporter who wrote a really fantastic story on what General Electric and a lot of these big companies are doing with stock buybacks and slashing employment and all of that stuff that benefits them and how it came to be. I've often said on this program, you go back to the Reagan years. You go back to the Reagan years and you look at the policy changes that they made. 1982 was a pretty big year. There was a lot of tax changes. The 401k thing popped up, which was honestly and truthfully, it was a tax dodge for rich people that they decided, hey, we could destroy that defined benefit pension system by giving them, the illusion that they're going to be able to partake in this tax dodge. And well, we all know how that worked out. But you go back and you look at those years, the Reagan years, and all of the changes to our tax code, all of the changes to how business operated. The business class really got everything they wanted because they set us down this path to where we are right now. They set us down the path that, it was a Democrat who signed into law the undoing of Glass-Steagall. Granted, it was the Republicans who pushed it through. Thanks, Phil Gramm. Who I affectionately call Tippy Turtle. Thanks for destroying our economy. Thanks for coming up with a piece of legislation that is horrible. But yet, they still tout sainted Ronnie Reagan as this icon. But when you go back and you look at what's actually come out of his legacy, I guess it depends on which side of the divide you're on. Which side are you on? Are you on the side of the wealth class who has done wildly, wildly well? Or on the side of the working people who have seen their wages decline? And not just in percentages and not just adjusted for inflation, but in actual dollars and cents. It's mind-blowing to me. But we're going to talk about all of that stuff. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your questions, your comments. You can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1894. The nation was in the grips of depression. Unemployment soared. Workers' wages and hours were cut dramatically in virtually every industry. Coal miners were especially hard hit. At a meeting in Columbus, Ohio, the United Mine Workers of America called for a nationwide strike. Even though the union had only about 20,000 official members, more than 6 times that many walked off the job. The strike stretched from Washington state to Alabama to the Appalachian coal fields. Violent skirmishes broke out when scab workers attempted to enter the mines and replace the striking miners. One such example occurred near Uniontown, Pennsylvania, where armed guards killed 5 striking workers and wounded 8 more. In 5 states, the militia was called out due to the unrest. Where the strikers were not able to turn away the scab labor, they employed a different tactic. They attempted to stop the delivery of the mined coal. In Illinois, for example, striking miners piled railroad ties and other debris on the railroad tracks to stop the coal trains from running. This interference with the trains meant that the federal government had the justification it needed to enter the struggle. A U.S. judge ordered an end to stopping train traffic. The New York Times declared the power of the federal government being behind the writ, all the force necessary to move the train will be used. The strike stretched on for weeks, but in the end, the strikers could not combat the coal mine owners, local militias, hired security, and scab labor. The strike was broken. The United Mine Workers faced a severe setback to their organizing that was not overcome for more than 2 decades. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm John Whitehouse. Fox host Sean Hannity and Univision host Jorge Ramos misrepresented the priorities of the Latino electorate, saying that if it weren't for the issue of immigration, Hispanics would favor conservative candidates. Here's Hannity.
The vote, historically, the Latino vote has gone more towards the Democrats than Republicans. Is it the issue of immigration?
Ramos responded.
Republicans, I think they've missed a huge opportunity because when it comes to values, they're very close to the Hispanic community. But Latinos honestly can't see beyond immigration right now because immigration reform is a prerequisite. When it comes to immigration, it seems that Jeb Bush has a better possibility of getting the Hispanic vote than Cruz and Rubio.
But this is a gross oversimplification of the priorities of the Latino electorate. A recent Pew poll found that Latino voters rank education, healthcare, jobs, and the economy as more important than immigration. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
The man who sends the investor class diving through their tax shelters. Rick Smith.
At every trough you stop to feed. With your arrogance, your ignorance and greed. Now here come the cuts and redundancy. Through the absolute indifference, the avarice, incompetence, your arrogance, your ignorance, your greed.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. So, as the war between capital and labor has always raged on. But I look now and I look at almost the one-sidedness. Every time you turn around, you're seeing these big corporations, another tax handout, another break. They're again enriching themselves, the few, at the cost of everyone else. You're seeing plant closures and massive pay cuts and benefit takes backs. And of course, let's kick the retirees while they're down. Also, the wealth class can have more. So when I saw this article over at the International Business Time about General Electric, I said, here's an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit more about it. That's why I've asked one of the authors of the article, Cole Stangler, to come talk with us. He's a staff writer over at the International Business Times. Cole, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, I look at this, this article you wrote, which fantastic work, by the way, really lays out the fact that what we're seeing is a massive redistribution of wealth from the people who work and produce to the folks who are basically just shifting money from one pocket to the other. And in the article, you point out that GE actually went to their employees and said, we want to take your wages from $28 an hour down to 11. What do you think?
Right. I mean, that's one of the things we focus on in the story is that massive wage cut they asked workers to take at Fort Edward, New York, which is an old plant that's been around since around World War II, and asked to cut wages from $28 to $11 an hour. And when the union said that was too much, and let's be honest, I mean that's hardly a serious offer, they packed up, moved out, left the union. They're still closing the plant right now, but when it's said and done, they're going to be doing the same exact thing in Clearwater, Florida. And of course, there's not a union there, and they'll be paying employees a lot less. And so the United Electrical Workers Union says that employees in Florida will be making around $12 an hour. And that includes part-timers also who will be making even less than that, $8 an hour. So, for GE, that's a tremendous amount of savings for workers doing essentially the same job, but you're getting pretty massive savings when it comes to labor costs.
Yeah, the massive wage theft right there. And not to mention, I'm sure the state of Florida gave them a nice, huge sweetener to come down to Florida.
Right. There's been talk of that as well. And Rick Scott, Governor Rick Scott, perhaps unsurprisingly, gave a triumphant press conference announcing the opening of that factory, which has actually been delayed, but soon to open factory.
Yeah, I mean, but don't we see this all across the country, Cole? I mean, you see these governors. I look at Kansas and Missouri, for instance. I mean, Kansas has declared war on Missouri by giving these huge tax abatements to these companies to just move across the street. In most cases, they're in Kansas City. And what ends up happening is students lose, seniors lose, the citizens lose, and the big corporations, they cash in.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. And to talk again about GE, I mean, the shift from Fort Edward to Clearwater, Florida is hardly exceptional. There's been kind of a trend at the company in the last decade or so of relocating away from traditional union towns like Fort Edward, like a much bigger plant that existed at Schenectady, and towards cheaper locations. And so in Pennsylvania, for instance, Erie, Pennsylvania, which was used to build locomotives for General Electric. The company decided, and that was also a union plant, and the company said, we're spending too much on this. Let's pack up and go to Fort Worth, Texas, where you can sell the same locomotives, but you don't have to pay the workers as much. And again, the main piece about this too is that at the same time as they're making these wage cuts, the same time as they're cutting benefits for workers, the same time that they're closing plants, they're spending a tremendous amount of money on these buybacks to benefit shareholders. So they just announced plans to spend $50 billion on buybacks. I mean, just think about what that translates to in terms of wages, in terms of benefits.
So basically, they stole $50 billion from the workforce so that they can enrich themselves. I mean, that part of it's not new. I mean, we've been seeing these companies doing these stock buyback things for years. I go back to the Bush years when they were allowed to repatriate money that they had hoarded offshore. They brought a bunch of money back, fired a bunch of workers, and enriched themselves. No surprise here.
It's true. The stock buybacks. I mean, this has been going on for quite some time. However, last month, or this was in February, was a single month record. $104 billion announced in share repurchases. $104 billion, and it's probably going to go up again when the March data is accumulated, because that includes that $50 billion that GE spent.
Wow.
So yes, it's true. It's been going on for some time, but what we're seeing it right now is it's reaching kind of new heights.
And I think as you so correctly point out in your piece, and a good thing here is you say that since 2009, S&P 500 companies have spent more than $2.5 trillion on these buyback schemes, and how much of that is the shifting of wealth from the working people to the investor class because you see it in the business news all the time. Oh, we're cutting our union workforce, we're laying people off, we're cutting wages, and all of a sudden the stock goes up. And it's almost been like this Pavlovian kind of treatment to where the market says fire people, cut their wages, and the wealth class will get richer, and it seems to work.
Right. And I think you're right. I mean, and I think in a lot of ways that accounts for the kind of two-tiered recovery where you have companies, you have corporate America, you have the Chamber of Commerce, Business Roundtable talking about how great the recovery is, kind of that's starting to really to benefit people. Meanwhile, for a lot of workers, it just really isn't. And I think part of that is these buybacks. And so a few other cases, companies that are at this moment resisting demands to increase wages, the fight for 15. You have companies like McDonald's spent $3.2 billion in buying back their own stock last year. Meanwhile, they're saying they can't hike wages to $15 an hour. And there's quite a few examples like that as well.
Yeah, but they did say they would take it up to $9 an hour. They did say
right,
that at 10% of their places, which again, I've made the argument this is what organizing and people in the streets will do. It makes people become aware, which I think what we're talking about right here is worth people getting in the streets over. This is a massive redistribution of wealth from people who work and produce and bust their behinds to people who are gambling on Wall Street, man.
Right. I mean, if in the way that the corporations talk about this is they sort of consider the budgets to be kind of separate issues, and so they don't consider what they're investing in the labor force to be the same pot of money, as it were, that they're spending on these buybacks. But if you believe that the wealth that these companies have is generated by workers, and I think that's a pretty fair case to make, then these companies have some really serious answering that they have to do. So why can't they spend that money that they're putting in buybacks to shareholders? Why can't they put that in the workforce?
Is there any positive to these buybacks for society as a whole? Is there anything good that comes out of this other than we've just enriched a handful of people?
I think if
has anyone made a cogent argument on that side saying this is actually good for us? It's good for business. It's good for society. Anybody?
Well, the argument is that it helps inspire confidence in the company. It signals confidence for shareholders, shows them that the companies are growing and that they can meet expectations and exceed them. So it's about signaling is the way that it's been argued traditionally to the market. So there's that. And it also, if you happen to be a shareholder at one of these companies and own a significant amount of that as well, then you're probably benefiting from this.
Yeah, I'm sure the shareholders are thrilled because they are doing a little bit better. But what percentage of the population of this country, of society, are direct shareholders and would get that kind of benefit? Because I would argue, they've got us sold in this idea that we're all invested in the market in one way or another because we've got these crummy 401ks.
Less than half of Americans actually own stock, and if you actually looked at what percentage of that owns a significant amount of stock, it'd be a lot lower than that.
And that's the thing that I think we have to be focused on. These deals, these kind of things, they definitely don't benefit the workers, taking their wages down from 28 to $11 an hour, which, as you were laying that out, where I live, there was a company that wanted to do the exact same thing. And I had a conversation with a local small business owner who said, well, those guys just make too much money. And I go, you do realize that difference is the money that you used to make. That used to be your money. And he actually didn't believe it until he closed his doors and had to shut his business down because those workers didn't have the disposable income to spend anymore. So I look at these massive cuts as not maybe good for the handful at the top, but horrible for society as a whole.
Right. And especially when you're talking about, some of these places that have faced cuts, like Fort Edward, New York, which, not too long ago, another GE plant closed, just in the town next door to it, in the community that's been there for, since around World War II, and that plant's been there. And so now, it's going to affect businesses that are around there. There's restaurants across the street that are going to suffer. And there's also, there's going to be a gaping hole in the center of town where this plant used to be. And it's a massive complex, with the parking lot and everything. And probably what people are speculating there is they're going to end up taking the top off of the plant so they don't have to pay taxes on it. So it's just going to sit there. And it'll be this kind of this reminder of GE.
Yeah, and what it'll end up being is the taxpayers, again, and this is what frustrates me about all of this stuff. It's we the people end up cleaning up the mess as these marauders jump around the country looking for the lowest wages, the most exploitable environmental regulations, and of course, the giant sweetener that comes in the way of tax breaks from these states that are participating in this beggar thy neighbor economic development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
frustrating stuff. But the other thing that really frustrates me, and this is why I think GE was probably the right choice for you, is this is one of the companies that doesn't really pay taxes here.
Right. I mean, we didn't bring up that in the article even, but that's true. And I think Jeffrey Immelt is close to the administration, and that's been pointed out as well.
Yeah.
It's also, I mean, the kind of outsourcing and offshoring trend of GE is really nothing that's all that new.
Yeah. Well, wasn't it Jack Welch who said the future of GE is China, 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 and they pursued that? I think they've done a pretty good job of pursuing that. You listen to the Rick Smith Show with Cole Stangler. He's a staff writer over at the International Business Times. Written a great piece on General Electric and the workers who are getting screwed over there. And basically, we, the taxpayers, getting shafted. I highly suggest taking a look at it. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. I did want to ask about the retirees and all of this, because GE has a significant number of retirees. And in the article, you point out that, they're not just screwing current workers, they're actually going after the retirees as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So in September 2012, they cut the healthcare plans, shifted healthcare plans for 65,000 retirees, and the savings came out to $832 million for GE. That's how much they saved on it. That was moving people away from Medicare supplement plans to smaller stipends. And so we talked to somebody who saw the price of his kidney drugs spike from $30 a month to $840 a month after the plan was canceled. 79 years old, worked 40 years at a GE plant.
Well, if you can't afford it, you should just die then, right? Isn't that the kind of the point?
Well, ask GE that.
Okay, there you go. One of the frames I hate those. I hate that the GE saved $832 million. No, they took it from their retirees and their workforce, because these were things that were promised through contract negotiations, as I understand it, right?
Correct. Yeah. This had been promised. And the other part is they also were in the last round of bargaining between GE and United Electrical Workers and some other unions as well, that are all part of negotiations. GE successfully shifted pension plans from for new hires to 401k plans, got rid of the defined benefit pension plans. So there's that as well. But all in all, there is this trend of cutting benefits and kind of making savings through cutting things that were promised to workers.
Yeah, breaking your promise and breaking all the contractual obligations that you had, because those workers worked for lower wages over the years so that they'd have that in retirement. And hey, let's just take that away. And then, hey, we'll use these buyback schemes. Let me ask you, when did all this buyback scheme stuff begin? Because I went to college back in the 80s, and I don't remember this being taught in the economics courses.
Yeah, so it really didn't start taking off until the late 1990s. And one of the first companies to really pioneer this approach was IBM. That's a company that also, and in a lot of ways, actually like GE. They have very different business models, but kind of broadly similar patterns of being these kind of old school manufacturing and companies that employed a lot of people that have, in the last couple decades or so, shifted their business models and cut significant parts of their workforce. Offshore jobs, outsourced, and so IBM, in fact, was sort of the pioneer of this, and that really started with their CEO.
Yeah, let me ask you. You say in your article that all this kind of stuff changed in 1982 when you had some regulatory changes. Any idea what that was?
Well, we'd have to. I wish I had my the co-author of the story here, who's more of.
I can always ask him later, because it's a question that I want to know, because we look back to the Reagan years, and I have some people who just think that was nirvana back during the Reagan years, and I've made the argument that a lot of those changes that they made on the regulatory side, a lot of the tax changes, the 401k loophole that they gave to very wealthy people as a tax dodge that we're now saddled with as a retirement plan, all came out of the Reagan years. And oh, by the way, let's not forget taxing unemployment benefits, so that while you get kicked down, they tax you on the federal level. So that's kind of where my curiosity is.
Yeah. No, I mean, I wish I had more background on that.
All right. Well, last question I've got for you then, because I look at this, and to me, when I see these kind of gimmicks coming up of how we can take what we've got and rearrange it so that we make more money, it's telling me that we're lacking some innovation and actually growing and actually doing positive things. It's just a matter of, hey, how can we cash out right now?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a question that probably needs to come up more often, I would think, and like I was saying before, there's the negotiations coming up right now where GE is going to resist probably pretty heavily demands to reinstate those old pension plans for new hires at the bargaining table. They're going to be resisting significant boosts in wages for workers that are unionized. And so, I think people should probably start asking the question, or at least pointing to these buybacks, saying, if you have the money to spend $50 billion on benefiting shareholders, perhaps you should consider investing some of that into the labor force, into the workforce, and giving these workers, a little bit more.
That's an excellent point. Cole, I appreciate you taking time for us. I appreciate the work you guys do over there at the International Business Time. Love to have you come back again and talk to us real soon.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much, Cole. Let's take a quick break. If you want to take a look at the story about GE and how it looks like they're screwing their workforce over, we've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Cole Stangler's name. Take you right there. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around and listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
And we ain't even planning on losing in this mighty war. The working class is under attack. Get up, fight on. Stand up, fight on. Yes, we can fight on. To the death, fight on. Get up, fight on. Stand up, fight on. Yes, we can fight on.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
We have to take into account all of the costs of not doing this.
Ontario, Canada launches cap and trade system to fight global warming.
We aren't thinking critically about the impacts of where the money of Harvard's endowment is going.
Students push Harvard to divest from fossil fuels. New poll finds majority of Americans support a tax on carbon emissions. Plus, the last male white rhino on Earth is now under 24-hour armed guard.
Wow, all of that and more straight ahead from bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
And when my granddaughter Olivia looks at me and says, Grandma, what did you do? What I'm not going to say to her, I put my head in the sand, and so I didn't take an initiative that would have saved the planet for your grandchildren. I'm not going to do that.
Oh, why not? Everyone else is. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's Earth Day coming up, but as we like to say every year here at the Green News Report, it's Earth Day every day.
Yeah, check out any of the tens of thousands of events around the world celebrating the only known planet in the universe to support life.
Speaking of which, what do you have for us today?
Citizens around the world are rising up to demand action on climate change. In Canada, tens of thousands marched across Canada this week to demand government action on global warming in advance of a climate summit held by Canada's provincial governors. In spite of heavy criticism from the Conservative Harper administration, which is trying to exploit Canada's fossil fuel reserves, Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne announced her province is launching a carbon cap and trade system to cut greenhouse gas emissions. She explained why in a press conference.
If we step back and we say, well, we can't do this because potentially there might be an impact that might be negative in one particular sector, that would be irresponsible. If we put our heads in the sand and we say, well, climate change it's not a problem that we can tackle right now. It's too risky. It's too politically fraught. We're just afraid to do it. That would not be responsible.
Cap and trade allows companies a limited amount of greenhouse gas emissions, and if a company has a leftover allowance, then it can sell that to companies that have gone over the limit. Ontario joins British Columbia and Quebec in now linking up to California's booming carbon trading market, which has already earned California nearly $1 billion.
Some critics have regarded cap and trade plans as a scheme, as opposed to a more simple carbon tax, a tax on emissions.
There are two different systems. Cap and trade actually deals directly with industries, whereas a carbon tax deals with everybody.
So everybody pays that tax, but that tax is then refunded to consumers for residential use.
It depends on how it's constructed. It doesn't have to go back to households. The revenue can be distributed in a number of ways. In America, a new poll has found that 67% of those polled supported that simple kind of carbon tax in which the biggest polluters pay and the revenue goes back to households. In the U.S., a divestment movement is gaining steam. At Harvard University this week, students blockaded university buildings, demanding that Harvard University divest its $36 billion endowment of all holdings in the fossil fuel industry.
Wait, $36 billion Harvard invests in stuff?
Yes, not all of that in fossil fuels, but it is the largest endowment in the United States.
Wow, that's amazing. So if Harvard pulls their money out of fossil fuels, that's a lot of money that will not be invested in those companies.
That's right. And in an interview with Democracy Now!, Divest Harvard student leader Talia Rothstein says civil disobedience became necessary.
We've been repeatedly refused open dialogue of the kind we feel this issue deserves. They refused to engage on this issue and inevitably had to resort to civil disobedience to put as much public pressure on the Harvard administration as possible.
Just a reminder, it was divestments like that that eventually got South Africa to end its apartheid regime. So we'll see if they have the same kind of effect here on the fossil fuel industry.
And good news, the race for clean energy has passed a turning point. Bloomberg News reports that around the world, more capacity for renewable energy is being built each year than coal, natural gas, and oil combined.
Nice. I like it.
Meanwhile, a heartbreaking story out of Africa. The last male northern white rhinoceros on the entire planet. There's literally only one male left. He has been placed under 24-hour armed guard in Sudan. He's one of only 5 remaining white rhinos in the world. The last male white rhino's horn has been amputated to deter poachers who have hunted all rhino species to near extinction in Africa because rhino body parts are highly prized in China.
Wow. So as soon as that one guy is gone,
that's it for the species.
Wow. For much more on all of the stories we covered today and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebook and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. 2 can be as bad as 1. It's the loneliest number since the number 1.
No matter how hard you try, you can't stop us now.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Since the prehistoric ages and the days of ancient Greece, walked down to the Middle Ages, planet Earth kept going through changes, and then the Renaissance came, and times continue to change. Nothing stayed the same, but there were always renegades, like Chief Sitting Bull, Tom Paine, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, they were renegades.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. So I look at this and, nothing new here. But understand when the calls for repatriating all of that money that these big corporations like GE have been hoarding offshore, the calls are going to come more. And we know this. We know that because they want to bring that money back in the worst way so they can take it and buy back more stocks. And what this does is it pumps up the price of the stock. And then what happens? Well, the CEO's share of it goes up. And it's really just a pump and dump system. So that this is the part of this that's important, as I understand it. That the price goes up, the price goes up, the price goes up. They dump it and it hits the ground. It goes down. And who ends up losing? Well, I guess we do, because we're the ones who aren't making these trades based on the ups and downs. We're investing for the long haul. And this is where I think that there has to be a transaction tax. We need to have a Tobin tax, a Robin Hood tax, whatever it is you want to call it. We need to have a strong sales tax, if you will, on stock transactions. And then we can fund things like overseeing the Wall Street for one, but also our roads and our bridges and education and all the things that we need, so that maybe the folks who are working for a living and are taxed enough already, maybe they could catch a break. Just a thought. But at the end of this, what goes on is, it's the policies that we pursue. It's the wealth class's agenda. That's really kind of frustrating with me. Just is what it is. Anyway, some good news today. The Obama administration came out with a report asking for billions of dollars to, quote unquote, modernize and transform our energy infrastructure, help to adapt to today instead of the 1950s. The Quadrennial Energy Review, I guess it's the first one that they have written. They hope to do it once every 4 years. The report describes a system of energy transportation, storage, and distribution, and basically, decades old. And we knew that. I mean, I go back to 1992. Jerry Brown was running for president, and he ran on the idea that, our electrical grid, horrible. It was horribly outdated then. Fast forward 23 years, and here we are, still horribly outdated. To me, that's that should have been something we did in 2009, 2010. Anyway, according to the 348-page report, energy infrastructure systems don't match and don't fit with today's domestic energy production, with the renewable energy, with all kinds of resilience needs and climate change and international security, they say, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff that they think needs to be upgraded. They say it's going to cost somewhere about $3.5 billion over 10 years to replace natural gas pipelines and improve the maintenance there. The Energy Department wants to spend somewhere around $5 billion to support state energy assurance pipeline program. So they're going to build some pipelines, I guess, because, terrorism, I guess. Also, the administration's calling for about $4 billion to modernize the electrical grid, as well as about $2 billion to promote capture and sequester. So they want to do some of the grab and bury stuff. I'm not against the idea of investing in upgrading our infrastructure. I don't know anybody is. I think I do. And the people who don't, no, we're going to raise my taxes. Yeah, so that we don't have this horrible infrastructure. And, I remember when Jerry Brown was running for president, he said something like, some outrageous, some obscene amount of energy was lost in just transmission lines, just getting from the power plants to your house. Something like 60% of it's lost just in transmission. And you think of how inefficient that is. And you go, shouldn't we have been? No, never mind. That's digs into profit, right? I guess so. Sad stuff. And to me, this is one of those opportunities for us to spend a little money, create some jobs, but also at the end of it, on the other side, be a much better country, a much stronger country, one that energy independent. Sounds like a good idea to me. But there is that. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
7, and I'll go to work at 9. I got no time for living, yes, I'm working all the time. It seems to me I could live my life a lot better than I think I am. I guess that's why they call me the working man.
Making the blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
A longtime Washington PR flack for tobacco giants, labor exploiters, frackers, and other corporate profiteers celebrates himself as Dr. Evil, the scourge of all progressive groups. But Rick Berman is not a doctor, not evil, and not a scourge. While he is a wholly unprincipled little man, he's just a self-serving huckster who grubs for corporate dollars by offering to do their dirty PR work. Berman's modus operandi is not exactly sophisticated. Taking money from the likes of Philip Morris, Monsanto, and Tyson Foods, he sets up tax-exempt front groups with nondescript names like Center for Consumer Freedom, Employment Policies Institute, and Environmental Policy Alliance, posing them as independent research outfits. Each one is an empty shell, run by his small staff out of his Washington, D.C. office. Using the names of the front groups, Berman and Company buy full-page newspaper ads and write opinion pieces that amount to raw hatchet attacks on whatever progressive groups or public policies the corporate funders want to kill. His mad dog style is hardly worrisome to those targeted, for rather than drawing converts to the corporate funders' cause, it merely rallies the usual anti-labor, anti-enviro, anti-fill-in-the-blank crowd. But it still appeals to brand-name corporate clients, for Berman promises to spew their message into the media without having any of the nastiness stick to them. We run all this stuff through nonprofit organizations that are insulated from having to disclose donors, he assured energy executives last year. There is total anonymity, he bragged. People don't know who supports us. This is Jim Hightower saying, but big holes in his curtain of anonymity are now revealing some of the corporations hiding behind it. To take a peek, go to www.bermanexposed.org.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Exposing GOP hypocrisy. The Rick Smith Show.
So over the weekend, I was reading a story from the Pakistan Today report. What am I doing reading Pakistan Today? Well, it was one of those things that just flashed up on my feed, talking about some declassified State Department reports that evidently claims that the leader of Pakistan was assassinated by us for not, or I guess we were behind it because Khan was not going to allow, or was not going to secure oil contracts for U.S. corporations in Iran. And according to the report, and this is Khan said he wouldn't use his friendship there in Iran for dishonest purposes. And the story goes, and whether you believe it or not, and I don't know. They arranged to find somebody, this guy who then went and shot and killed Khan with 2 shots, and then they killed him, of course, because you can't have the assassin telling the tales. And it's one of those things that as I sat and I thought about, I remember an interview I did a couple of years back with a guy named John Perkins. He was the author of a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And, on the program, he said, look, I would go to these new dictators. I would go to these people and I would, I'd say, hey, you got 2 choices. Here's a big suitcase full of cash, just a massive box of cash, or here's a bullet. Choose one. And you have to choose now, he said, because, we're not going to hang around and wait. You get one or the other. And, I see these stories and you go, is it possible our CIA was involved? Because they're saying, back during the Truman years, this is what was ordered. And, for oil back then, do you think possible? I'd be curious of anyone's thoughts, especially given the frame that, I've never forgotten that statement by the John Perkins guy that, and here's a guy who said he did it. He walked in and said, here's the big bag of cash or the bullet. And he said some took each. So Interesting story. But on the oil front, I mean, that was yesterday. Tomorrow going to be water. Look at what's going on in California with the water droughts and all of the stuff going on there, rationing and restrictions and fines. Yet Nestle and the big water companies, well, not so much. And you got to wonder, at which point do we start having wars over water? At which point do we start going, maybe it's not such a great idea to be allowing a company like Nestle, one of the largest water companies in the entire world, to just be sucking water out of one of the driest areas in the country for profit. And that's the weird thing. It comes back to that profit motive. And, basically what we've been talking about, who benefits with the policies that are being pursued? Who is it that didn't decide that we should be regulating the people who are taking way, way more than what life needs to sustain in the way of water in California? Who decided that Nestle gets this? Who decided that these big water companies get it? I know it wasn't the people who are now going, uh-oh, we might not have any water. And what I find interesting is the CEO of Nestle, he actually doesn't believe water is a human right. He actually doesn't believe that, that you should have a right to water. You should have a right to pay for it. And that's his business. And I just find it interesting that, you've got all of these wealthy people now saying, it's our profit. And I guess that's kind of the question I have for us. What society do we see? What society do we want? What kind of an economy do we want? What kind of a world do we want for our kids? Is this it? Is it for profit? Everything for profit? And if you can't afford to buy water, well, just like they say, if you can't get health care or you can't buy food or housing or any of that, where does it end? Where does it stop? And is the everlasting pursuit of profit, is that what our future is? Because I got to tell you, I think it's unconscionable that we've allowed these big companies to get away with all of the things that they've gotten away with. And as I've said over the years, if I wanted to kill somebody, I'd probably just hire them. I'm on the 5th floor here, and if I wanted to bump off my producer Sean, I just kind of nudge him out the window, and it was a work accident. He was fixing a blind, standing on the desk on one foot, and he fell out the window. It could happen, right? But because it was on the job, it happens. It's a workers' comp now. So I don't know. I'm a little flustered, and this water thing really, really very frustrating, because it shows where the policy decisions are made. And I think that's the key here. Everything that's gone on over the last 40 years, everything that has happened has been a choice. There's no such thing as the invisible man who does all these invisible things. These are policy choices that we, the people, made by electing people like Ronald Reagan, people like Bill Clinton, people like George W. Bush, and even people like Barack Obama. I got to be honest. When was the last time we saw a true populist agenda? And in the next hour, we're going to talk about how do we close that inequality gap? How do we begin to pull the nation back together and maybe start talking about living, maybe what Krugman called the Great Compression, to where, we're all leading sort of similar lives in the same ballpark, maybe just on the same planet. I'm not sure. But it'll be interesting to see what they come up with there. Also, in the next hour, going to talk a little bit about medical marijuana. Should we be legalizing the medical weed, or have the fearmongers scared us enough? Or are the right-wing champions of get government out from between me and my doctor, are they going to come to their senses? We will find out. Anyway, if you've missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I answer all emails personally. I'm going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. for working people. On the talk.
Days we're gonna wake up and find a new day. One of these days we wanna wake up and make a new way. One of these days. One of these days.
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
When it comes to politics, especially in this day and age, it simply makes no sense to put all of our eggs in one political basket. The days of our union being viewed as a handmaiden for one political party or the pawn in somebody else's political game must come to an end.
North American Building Trades President Sean McGarvey. McGarvey delivered the keynote speech at the Building Trades 2015 Legislative Conference Monday here in Washington, D.C. McGarvey's message was to think more strategically when it comes to politics and internal mobilization of building trades union members. He says building trades members are split roughly 60-40 between Democrats and Republicans, and the American political reality is purple, tinged with red.
Brothers and sisters, all I'm saying is it's time for us to start playing a new game. And we can't do this overnight. But 10 years from now, the economic well-being of our members should no longer be dependent on who occupies the White House, a governor's mansion, a state legislature, or the United States Congress, because we have constructed building trades majorities at all levels of government.
McGarvey says the building trades are not climate change deniers, despite sometimes being on the opposite side of issues with the environmental movement.
And let me be clear, when it comes to the building trades and the environment, first off, we are not climate change deniers. Our unions have consistently been in favor of a balanced region global solution that puts us on a path to address the serious nature of climate change, but does so in a manner that does not destroy the American middle class and the ability of our members to ply their crafts.
McGarvey says the building trades are on a positive trajectory, having added 53,000 members in 2014. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers says that its efforts to organize the South Carolina Boeing plant are far from over, despite the union's withdrawal of a petition for an April 22nd union election. The IAM says two of its organizers were threatened at gunpoint during worker home visits. The union also cited a toxic environment and gross violations of workers' rights as the reasons that it's postponing an election. The IAM says Boeing's campaign of rumors and threats may have succeeded in delaying the union election, but the fight to win collective bargaining rights for thousands of Boeing South Carolina workers is far from over.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, healthcare, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Standing up to conservatives and corporatists every weeknight. The Rick Smith Show.
So now you see the light. Hey, stand up for your right. Come on, get up, stand up. Stand up for your right. Get up, stand up. Don't give up the fight.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So yesterday was 420 day, and no hearing on legalizing medical marijuana. They waited until today to do that. The Pennsylvania State Senate held their hearing, and I guess passed out of their committee the medical marijuana bill, which hopefully will move forward and will end this nonsense. What I love is the right wing. When we were talking about Obamacare, saying we gotta get the government out between me and my doctor, but on this, they want the government right between them and their doctor, which is kind of insane to me. But anyway, to talk a little bit about the medical marijuana issue, and maybe a little even further, I've got Patrick Nightingale. He is the executive director of Pittsburgh Normal. Patrick, thanks for taking the time for us.
Hey, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about an issue that is, increasingly important to us here in Pennsylvania and an issue that is becoming increasingly muddled and obfuscated as we move through the committee process in Harrisburg.
And here's the thing that gets me, and I got to be honest, most people I talk to about this issue, they already think it's perfectly legal for a doctor to prescribe medical marijuana or cannabis or any of this stuff to their patient. Most people I talk to cannot believe that a doctor can prescribe cocaine, but not marijuana.
You know, that's exactly true. Cocaine is a Schedule II controlled substance and has been, available for physicians to use for a considerable period of time, obviously since the dawn of the Controlled Substances Act. And most hospitals will have, some type of cocaine and procaine as numbing agents available, to numb nasal passages for intubation. Meanwhile, marijuana remains a Schedule I controlled substance, which means that we can't even study it. We can't study it in a university setting. Anyone that receives federal funding cannot use that federal funding to study cannabis research. So, we're told, hey, we need more studies, but we can't have more studies because we are still Schedule I.
Yeah, I got to be honest though, Patrick. I remember my college days, and I knew a lot of guys, and a lot of my friends they were doing a lot of research with pot.
Well, anecdotally speaking, how much more research do you need? For example, in the February Senate hearings, the Pennsylvania Medical Society testified that we simply don't know the long-term effects of cannabis use, so we oppose its use as a medicine. And all I was sitting there thinking, you don't know the long-term effects of cannabis use. Haven't you seen Tommy Chong on Dancing with the Stars? Don't you know that Willie Nelson is about to go on tour? The man is 82 years old, and he's doing a cross-country tour. Those are your long-term effects.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, I guess. But on the medical side of this, I'm still struck that we're even having this conversation, and that it just doesn't fly straight through, because I think the vast majority of people, especially on the medical side of it, and we'll get to the other side of it in a minute, but the medical side of it just seems to be a no-brainer.
Oh, absolutely. According to the most recent Quinnipiac University poll, we are at 88%. That means 9 out of 10 Pennsylvanians support some form of medicinal cannabis reform here in Pennsylvania. But you would think that the numbers were just the opposite, that 9 out of 10 opposed medicinal cannabis. If you talk to, some in the Republican leadership in both the Senate and the House, they are acting as if we are the first state to consider this, that all we want to do is, go out into the park and smoke joints and pretend that we've got a sore foot or a sore back. And they ignore the fact that we have 23 medicinal marijuana states here in the United States, that over 100 million Americans have access to medicinal marijuana, and they conveniently ignore the hundreds of published clinical studies, the same type of clinical studies that would be used in FDA clinical trials, and have the nerve to say that there is no evidence and no science that supports the efficacy of medical cannabis. It is maddening. I don't understand it. It's like, going back 50 years in time and pretending the rest of the world doesn't exist.
Or almost 100 years to reefer madness. And that, have you ever seen that idiot movie?
I've got the marquee right here in my law office. I have it hanging on the wall, and right next to it, I'm going to put a hemp for victory sign
there you go.
To kind of show the absurdity of our relationship with hemp, with marijuana, with prohibition, and the lies upon which it was all based.
Yeah, for me, I've got a bunch of different thoughts, but I have a friend who, he gets relief because he's got an eye problem. He gets relief from smoking marijuana. It helps him, and the fact that he's got a deal in some of the seedy dark alleys and almost like a criminal just to get some relief, to me is ludicrous in this day and age.
And what we're finding is that it's not just marijuana. It is certain types of marijuana. Is a sativa something that's going to benefit a particular patient for their condition? Would an indica be better? Would an alcohol-based tincture that could be administered in droplets be a preferred delivery method? Or is vaporization preferable? And, these are questions that if you were stuck scoring off of your local dealer, you're never going to know the answers to. In a well-regulated state such as Colorado, Michigan, Oregon, you can go to a medicinal marijuana dispensary and know exactly what you're getting and exactly what some of the qualities of that cannabis strain or cannabis product are. You're going to talk to experienced people who can say, yes, we have other patients that come here and they find that this particular strain is very effective in the treatment of chronic neuropathic pain. Oh, there are other people here who suffer from epilepsy and they happen to prefer this type of oil. Why don't you talk to your neurologist about that and consider trying this? We don't have that if we are relegated to the black market, and we don't know if the medicine that we're relying on is at all what it purports to be.
Or if it's actually going to help you, or if who knows what it's made with. That's an interesting point. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Patrick Nightingale. He's the executive director of Pittsburgh Normal. Their website, pittsburghnormal.org. You can get the link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Patrick's name. Now let's talk about the legalizing outside of this, because I think you're right. I think the vast majority of people, they do see the medical side of it as a no-brainer. I do have some reservations about opening up the floodgates, and as I've said, we'll see what happens in Colorado. And my reasoning is a little bit different. I think my reasoning is I fear corporate America so much that I fear what happens when you hand this over to one of the big tobacco companies or who knows what, and what they end up doing with it. I'm curious your position on where we should be in the legalizing or at least decriminalizing area.
I'm a criminal defense attorney here in Pittsburgh, and my reaction tends to be, I don't care if Walmart does it. I don't care if R.J. Reynolds does it. I don't care if Anheuser-Busch does it, because it's better than prohibition. It's better than my clients being arrested, taken to jail, posting bond, having criminal convictions. It's better than facing a felony charge for growing a plant. Now, that said, that's an easy thing for me to say and say as a cop-out, oh, I don't have to take a position on corporate America. But my answer to that is that I believe that the cannabis consumer in this country has become a very demanding consumer. We are not going to want the Bud Light of marijuana if marijuana becomes legal. We are going to want to go in and pick out those specialty strains that we're interested in. There may be some of a marketplace for lower grade marijuana, and that may be the type of market that an R.J. Reynolds may want to fill. But unless these corporate entities are going to get into the game of producing high quality medicinal types of strains and products, I don't know that the marijuana consumer, the educated consumer, is going to want what they're going to try to sell in the first place. I kind of expect the market will take care of itself in that respect.
So we're going to make the free market argument then.
Yeah, and we'll see, what is going on in Colorado right now. They're having a lot of success, with local businesses, and, that's by and large because there's no banking regulations that permit, marijuana banking transactions, and it's limited to Colorado, so you can't have, corporations in other states, coming in and opening up shop or whatever the case may be. So if we do have a fully legal system where it's legal throughout the United States, obviously there are reasons to fear that, big players will squeeze out small players and consumer choices will be restricted. But I look forward to that compared to, defending my clients in court.
Yeah, I got to be honest, though. I look forward not as the big guys squeezing out the little guys. I look at it as from the research and development angle. How do we get people hooked on it so that they're, buying more of it? Ended up like, the fast food industry or big tobacco, for instance, where it's highly addictive. And now you create more problems with it.
I can see your concern, but I think that the fact that we already exist as a consuming body, in every state in the United States of America, I don't think we're going to, let, someone do that type of research and introduce, some fancy, synthesized derivative. No, we understand what natural plant material is, and that's what we want. We want, organically grown, safe plant material that is either available in that flower form or processed into safe and efficient products. But your point is well taken, and until we can see that come to play, my answers are speculative. I could be entirely wrong.
No, I mean, this is why what's interesting is watching what's going on in Colorado. At the end of the day, if they make it legal tomorrow, I will not. I'm not one who's ever partaked in it. I probably never will. So it's not an issue that I'm vested in personally. I just think about it from a societal standpoint and for my kids. I mean, I look at what, when I was 13, kids started smoking cigarettes. They were hooked on it almost immediately. And that's where my fear lies. The fact that we've criminalized this and we've locked up, almost a generation of people for nonsensical crimes to me is dumb, and I'm okay. I think decriminalizing it is the first step towards ending this.
I would agree with that 100% because we understand that not everyone is ready for a fully legal marijuana marketplace, either here in Pennsylvania or across the country as a whole. There are a lot of reservations. Law enforcement necessarily has appropriate reservations, and not so much, the reefer madness reservations, but law enforcement does have legitimate concerns about will there be an increase in DUI and DUI-related incidents? Will there be an increase in any type of antisocial behavior associated with a loosening of the marijuana marketplace? Will, for example, dispensaries be targets for robberies? I mean, liquor stores are notorious targets for someone looking for some quick cash.
Yep.
So I don't doubt whatsoever that law enforcement has an appropriate voice to play in this. But law enforcement in Colorado, law enforcement in Washington, I think are pleasantly surprised that they're not dealing with an increase in criminality associated with the legal marijuana marketplace. We just had the 420 celebration in Colorado. Denver, tens of thousands of people getting together at the High Times Cannabis Cup, and we really heard no problems associated with that whatsoever. No reports of fighting, of thefts, of any of the type of antisocial concerns that you would have whenever you get a large group of people together consuming intoxicants.
But there was a shortage of Twinkies and Doritos.
Always. If there's one thing that we can do, and that's get the munch.
There you go. Because like I said, I mean, my fear is I don't know that I want it on the shelf next to the Tic Tacs, but I also don't want someone's life ruined over it. And I think that's a common sense, at least in my view, a common sense first step.
Exactly. Let's just back off a little bit and stop using law enforcement to express a moral judgment about what someone should or should not be doing. Every day, police officers tell me, you know what, I wish you would hurry up with this legalization stuff because I'm tired of wasting my time on this. Law enforcement has much more serious and important issues that they need to be dedicating their time and efforts to, especially because I think as a society, we have matured to the point where we can look at cannabis use and we can look at the reefer madness mentality and say, wait a minute, we have been sold a false bill of goods. This isn't nearly as bad as we were led to believe. And it's not even as bad as alcohol, which we consume at holidays and family celebrations and, pretty much live an alcohol-fueled lifestyle.
Good point. Last question I've got: do you see the medical marijuana part of this passing? Where do you see this going in the coming weeks and months?
I see us having a heck of a time getting this through the House. I believe that the Pennsylvania House would have enough votes to pass medicinal marijuana reform if they were given the choice of having an up and down vote, but we've got to go through committee. One of our House committee chairs, Matt Baker, he's the chair of the Health Committee from Tioga County. He is Harry Anslinger reincarnated. He is the embodiment of reefer madness. Wow. He is an immobile object. He simply doesn't care that it can help sick children. He doesn't believe the science, and he doesn't want it to pass. That is a significant impediment in moving forward. So how do we, do an end around the Health Committee, for lack of a better term, and get a bill for an up and down vote on the House floor? Yeah. That's going to be, one of the main things that we've got to deal with. And, here's where the inner workings of Harrisburg is something that it could work to our benefit. It could not.
Yeah. Either he's against it completely, or that's where it's all being grown right now.
Exactly.
It's big business up in those in the hinterlands. But Patrick, I appreciate you taking time for us. Interesting conversation. I'd love to have you back as this continues.
Anytime. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and thank you very much for the call. Look forward to speaking again.
All right. Thanks so much, Patrick Nightingale. He's the executive director of Pittsburgh Normal, pittsburghnormal.org, the website. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1894. The nation was in the grips of depression. Unemployment soared. Workers' wages and hours were cut dramatically in virtually every industry. Coal miners were especially hard hit. At a meeting in Columbus, Ohio, the United Mine Workers of America called for a nationwide strike. Even though the union had only about 20,000 official members, more than 6 times that many walked off the job. The strike stretched from Washington State to Alabama to the Appalachian coal fields. Violent skirmishes broke out when scab workers attempted to enter the mines and replace the striking miners. One such example occurred near Uniontown, Pennsylvania, where armed guards killed 5 striking workers and wounded 8 more. In 5 states, the militia was called out due to the unrest. Where the strikers were not able to turn away the scab labor, they employed a different tactic. They attempted to stop the delivery of the mined coal. In Illinois, for example, striking miners piled railroad ties and other debris on the railroad tracks to stop the coal trains from running. This interference with the trains meant that the federal government had the justification it needed to enter the struggle. A U.S. judge ordered an end to stopping train traffic. The New York Times declared the power of the federal government being behind the writ, all the force necessary to move the train will be used. The strike stretched on for weeks, but in the end, the strikers could not combat the coal mine owners, local militias, hired security, and scab labor. The strike was broken. The United Mine Workers faced a severe setback to their organizing that was not overcome for more than 2 decades. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've begun the story of the close relationship between Presidents Lyndon Johnson and Harry Truman. We've talked about how much the circumstances of their presidencies were alike, both becoming president because of their predecessor's death, both with unpopular wars, and both Southerners. And then it can be noted that both were Democrats and both won election to the office on their own one time. But these 2 men were also bonded on a policy measure. They both had the same belief regarding a social issue, and it was both of their efforts together that forged a new program that is an American staple today. In 1912, Theodore Roosevelt put what he called social insurance for sickness in the platform of his American Progressive Party. From that point on, the controversy over national health insurance is brewed. Join us again for the forging of national health care insurance. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
We make Pennsylvania happen!
blue blood see red. The Rick Smith Show.
You fascists, you may be surprised. People all over this world are getting organized to bow to lose. You fascists about to lose.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So for an update on what happened over at the Capitol here in Harrisburg, our Capitol reporter Sean Kitchen. Sean, so what was going on today? I guess they passed what happened with the hearing?
Well, at the Senate hearing today, they walked in, they stood up, they took roll call, sat down, voted on it, and it came out of committee 9-0 or 11-0. So it was pretty much a one and done type of thing.
So the whole walk over to the Capitol, kind of a waste of time.
There was a few other things going on today. We had the education hearings. Pedro Rivera there was a big yuck fest with the Senate Education Committee. He got his vote came up for confirmation in the committee. That's going to go onto the floor. And people were loving what he's doing. Republicans, Fulmer absolutely was just falling over the floor of Rivera because...
Little gaga, huh?
Yeah, all gaga because it was the first time any secretary of some agency sent him a letter in response. Which...
What?
Yeah. So Fulmer sends people letters, and it was the first time he ever got a letter back from that agency's director. And Fulmer was absolutely amazed over it. He was almost crying over it.
Someone likes me.
Sis and Mike. There we go.
Wow, that's weird. All right, what else went on?
Dinniman also took time at today's hearing to go after the Keystone exams and why people should be opting their children out of those Keystone exams, especially with the graduation requirements. He was talking about Overbrook High School, where for these exams, you have to take a biology part. And schools like in Philadelphia, like Overbrook, hasn't had a biology class in 4 years. And
whoa, stop. They haven't had a biology class in 4 years?
I don't know, not class, but they haven't had a certified biology teacher there in 4 years.
So what, they just throw the book on the desk and say, go?
Well, here you go. Like the book is from 2004, and it's not up to Common Core standards. So it's not even up to the standards of the test, and they're using this book from 2004.
All right, so they're just leaving the book on the table, I guess. Here, just go. Or maybe it's they're doing the cyber charter thing in the classroom.
Maybe, but he's also he told me today he's reintroducing his legislation to put a moratorium on the Keystone on the graduation requirements with the Keystones, and maybe it'll go somewhere this time.
It should. I mean, at the end of the day, look, I've opted my kids out of taking these ridiculous high stakes for-profit tests. And the sad reality is one of the things my wife and I actually had to sit down and discuss is, the consequences of not doing it are, we don't know. Some kind of a project maybe with no understanding of what it's going to be. And yet we're kind of walking into the abyss because I have a religious problem with my kids being forced to take these tests. Also, they can work to defund and discredit public education.
And when I caught up with Dinniman afterwards, he said, "Look at me. Does it look like I could take a test? If I didn't take these exams, I wouldn't be where I'm at today." So and he was an educator at Westchester University. He has his PhD in actual teaching. So
he can't take the test.
He can't take the test, and he wouldn't be able to pass the test.
Wow.
And that's why he's probably against the test.
I looked at the test. I looked at both I looked at the third grade test. My wife looked at the 7th grade test, and I'm looking at it.
And it was like in hieroglyphics.
It might as well be. I'm not allowed to tell you what was on the test. I had to sign a blood oath that I could never talk about what was on the test.
So you wouldn't be able to go do 3rd grade math or reading?
No, look, the way they teach math nowadays, really just kind of go, 18 plus 18 is, 36. I know that. But there, you break it down and put 10 over here and 10 there and a 5 and a 1. And you got all this jumble going on.
So did you have to figure out that girl's birthday? Like that was going around?
I did figure out her birthday. That wasn't a math problem. That was just a riddle. Anybody, and this is the problem with this. When you start calling that math, it wasn't. It was a riddle. It was a common sense. It was this deduction of going, okay, well, he couldn't know this, he couldn't know this, and figuring out what they both could know. That's all that was. Had nothing to do with math. You weren't adding up the dates. You weren't adding up the months. There was no addition or subtraction there was none of that. There was going, oh, well, he couldn't know this, he couldn't know that. Ah, there's the one that they both could possibly know. That's it. Nuts. And they call it math. Someone should smack somebody who says that's a math problem. Anything else over at the Capitol?
There was a rally today with the police officers. It's now the
big police love fest.
A big sloppy wet kiss for all the police officers out there today. And yes, they have a hard job, but they were using some stuff like 9/11 and how we're moving towards a society that we hate police officers simply because they have a badge on their chest.
No, I think there are some people who don't like police officers because they beat them and treat them poorly. But that's
it's another story. Time for another story. But no. There was that going on today, so all the legislators were lining up, just wanting to speak over it and get their photo op in there with the cops and make sure they're pro cop and nothing goes wrong next time around.
I'm as pro cop as anyone. I want to see them go home at the end of the day safe and sound. I want them to make their jobs as easy as possible.
And they are going to be introducing a new law there too, Rick. You can't taunt a cop. So next time you get pulled over and you snatch a ticket out of their hands, you won't be able to. You might get arrested.
All right. So is that where you're going with that? All right, sure. Rub it in. Rub it in. All right, fine. Fine with you. You're done. Let's take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people come to talk.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
It is believed that a little hard work is good for the soul. If this is true, then the history of child workers in the United States is a soulful tale. The first child laborers landed in Virginia in the year 1619. These immigrant children found slave working conditions and poverty wages in their new world. As the years passed, little changed. The average child worker toiled 16 to 18 hours per day, 6 days a week in factories and textile mills. Education was a luxury, and many believed a loss on working children. Charles Harding, president of the Merchants Woolen Company, stated, "There is such a thing as too much education for working people sometimes. I have seen cases where young people are spoiled for labor by too much refinement." Labor unions, consumer groups, and parent coalitions all work to shorten hours, ease conditions, and ultimately end exploitive child abuses. Baby strikes in Paterson, New Jersey, and Allentown, Pennsylvania, demanding 11 and 12-hour workdays were fought vehemently by mill and factory owners. The Pennsylvania legislature was the first to consider prohibiting child workers in 1833, and consider is all Pennsylvania did until July of 1903, when Mother Jones led the March of the Mill Children from Philadelphia to Oyster Bay, New York, in an attempt to influence President Theodore Roosevelt. In 1836, Massachusetts was the first state to pass a law restricting the use of children in manufacturing. And 102 years later, the United States Supreme Court ruled the Walsh-Healy Act restricting the use of child labor as constitutional. Also in 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which put more stringent restrictions on the use of child labor. While hard work teaches discipline, self-reliance, and responsibility, the exploitive nature of our past must remind us that what we have today, we mustn't take for granted, for the days of tomorrow are doomed to repeat if we ignore those lessons hard learned. This Rick Smith Show Labor History Moment was made possible by a grant from the Labor Education Center at IUP. For more information, visit www.thericksmithshow.com.
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thoughts are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Working hard to make a living, rich out of poverty. Father, son, left to carry on, blue down in his vein. Oh, he's a working class man.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So we're seeing a lot of reports in the news about inequality. For about the last decade, I've been screaming about the two Americas, the splitting of the haves and the have-nots. And how do we close that? What policies, what choices do we make as a society to close that gap? You go back to the Great Depression, and I like how Paul Krugman puts it, you had this great compression where we were all kind of leading similar lives. We're all kind of in the ballpark. Sad reality is not all of us are in the ballpark. Some are almost on different planets when you look at the gulf in economic inequality in this country. And I've seen that there's a commission that's popped up, the Inclusive Prosperity Commission. They've come up with some good ideas on some good, some bad, who knows, ideas on how we close that gap. And here to talk about it, I've asked Michael Medowitz. He's an economist over at the Center for American Progress, AmericanProgress.org, the website. Michael, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on.
So I look at this commission, the Inclusive Prosperity Commission. I guess first question is, who put this together? How did it come together? What's their goal?
So the idea here was actually kind of a broad recognition that we're seeing trends in lots of different countries that are kind of the same thing, which is this kind of growing inequality problem. So we had the British Labour Party get involved in this. We had members of parliament from Australia. There's no way I'm ever going to remember all the people involved. And then, of course, CAP sort of convened the thing to sort of herd the cats, if you will. And, you know, the sort of overall takeaway here was that we keep hearing all these stories that, like, there's a lot of inequality happening, and the data say that's right. And there's also this kind of fatalism about, like, well, it's just kind of the way things are. This is the way things are going. And the thing that we liked a lot about how this ended up shaking out is having all these international perspectives let us say, you know, that the sort of standard answers you hear, which are kind of, I mean, they're like on speed dial. People just kind of say these things without really thinking them through. You know, these aren't actually compelling when you sort of look at across all these countries, right? So if it's, you know, working folks can't earn a good wage because robots are replacing them, that doesn't actually hold up. If you look at a place like Australia or Canada, you know, they have robots too, but the middle class does see income growth there, whereas, you know, in places like the US and the UK, you've seen that sort of stagnate in the last, you know, couple generations.
And I would argue those are policy choices. Those are our political choices that our elected leaders made. That's not the work of some invisible hand. These were actual choices that people made, and we can undo those bad choices and pursue a different path, has always been my view.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to that. Like, I mean, I certainly believe robots exist. I believe they matter. I believe that what you do with policy has a lot to do with how you cope with that entering the workforce. And I mean, you know, if you look across countries like, you know, Denmark has a really strong minimum wage. They have robots too, and the robots there don't seem to have driven wages down nearly as much as they have.
Oh, well, that's the fear that we're always saddled with here. If we raise the minimum wage, they'll mechanize everything, and then there'll be nobody working. Which I always answer to, well, maybe we should then be talking about the Milton Friedman idea of a negative tax and some guaranteed minimum income. But that usually falls on deaf ears.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually an interesting one too, because you could get pretty much every economist when they put their theoretical hat on would get behind that idea. But, you know, in real life, it's harder to get people to buy into that. You know, I, by the way, have no qualms with like robots doing all the work for us as long as everybody owns a reasonable share of what the robots do. I think the real concern now is that, you know, as robots are doing more of our work, it seems like a very small number of people seem to own most of them or get most of the gains.
Yeah, and doesn't that come back to like a tax code that would be a little more progressive, maybe going back to the good socialist president, Dwight David Eisenhower's tax code?
Yeah, the Socialist Republican Party, they did a lot of great
stuff. By today's standards, you know, I could have been you know, he's probably further to the left than Bernie Sanders is.
I have no idea.
You have no words for that, do you?
But no, I mean, I think there really is something to that. You know, I think that we've kind of forgotten how to do a progressive tax code in the U.S. in particular.
No, we haven't forgotten. We've been trained like Pavlovian dogs to anytime someone talks about having anything to do with raising taxes, we foam at the mouths.
Well, and I mean, I'm not even thinking about just raising taxes too. I'm thinking about like, you know, once you get over $400,000, there is no further increase in tax rates for people, right? I mean, there's, you know, the income tax, that's the top bracket. That's, you know, we stop there. If you go back to like the Eisenhower years, you know, we had something like 27 tax brackets instead of 5 then.
Yep.
And so when they talk about the top earners paying 90% of their income in taxes, we aren't talking about like what we would think of as the top earners now. We really are talking about like the super duper billionaires. And, I think that the inability to sort of distinguish how much we're taxing the rich from the super, super rich is really something that we need to pay a little more attention to.
See, but anytime you talk about that stuff, Michael, you get saddled with, your class warfare or, class envy or any of those frames. And look, I actually know somebody who's fairly well off, and even in his world, and he's well at the top of the 1%. Even in his world, there's a chasm between him and the, oh my gosh, you've got it all.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, I think, that's sort of, I don't know exactly how to get at what that difference is, but I mean, at some point we recognize that, even millionaires had people that made a whole lot more money than them. And like our tax code did something to sort of make those outcomes a little less unequal. And it just doesn't seem to have the ability to do that now. Part of that is because for a long time you had people in the economics profession saying, well, I mean, like you were just saying, like, not only can you not do this class warfare, but that, if you raise taxes on the rich, you're going to slow down the economy and everybody's going to suffer. And, not to toot my profession's horn too much, but we've done a lot of good research in the last 20 years and gotten a lot better data. And it turns out, that finding doesn't hold up nearly as well to, real scrutiny. When you look at what actually creates growth when you do tax cuts, it's not tax cuts for the rich. It's actually tax cuts for,
people who spend the money.
Folks.
You mean people
Right.
like me and you?
Yeah, I mean, you really don't see that many people go out and buy the second yacht, it turns out. But, if you cut taxes on folks who could use a newer car, that leads to more stuff.
And it's that common sense part of it. You give money to people who are going to spend it, they spend it. And that activity creates jobs of people, doing whatever, providing them a meal, washing their dog, cleaning their car, whatever. But that's the economic activity that gets the motor running. But then I think you have to have policies, and you talk about this in the commission report, of raising that minimum wage to a level that's high enough, what you say, to prevent full-time workers from living in poverty. And then also going that next step, as I've always said, we should just be indexing the minimum wage so that it keeps up with inflation, and we don't have 8 years of Ronald Reagan and 6 years of Barack Obama where the minimum wage doesn't get increased.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know how much of that was this commission sort of getting on board with, smart government that does things a little more automatically, and how much of that was this commission looking around at what's been going on since Obama became president, and you've just had this complete gridlock, and saying, look, we can't have working folks dependent on people that get along twice a year to make sure that their income keeps up with costs.
So the other part of this is the education component that you guys talk about in this report, about making college affordable. And I think, honestly, truthfully, what's happened to this generation of college students, what we've done to these kids is no less short of criminal. We have saddled them with what's going to be a lifetime of debt, and it doesn't look like any way for them to get out from under it. My generation didn't get saddled with it. My parents' generation didn't. But this is what we've done to this generation of kids. All because they wanted the opportunity of having a middle-class existence.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, I think there's a really big knock-on effect that's actually even more worrying, right? So if you go back and crunch through all the data, the premium that you earn from a college degree in the US right now is still quite high. And it turns out that, like, even with all that debt, in the long run, it's probably a better investment on average. The problem is, the average person is not every person. And, if you don't get a job immediately out of college, it's much harder to pay all that back. What I actually worry about a lot is, now that you do have this kind of consciousness of so many people out there who've, put in their time, done all their work in college, taken out a lot of loans, and then not found success in the labor market, is you have kind of a chilling effect of people who, are bright. We should be educating them more so they can be super productive members of our economy. And, there's a certain fear there now where it's like, yeah, I'm not really sure that I do want to invest in myself because I don't want the risk of all this debt that I can't get rid of.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that's not good for a society or our economy, because you want to be producing more educated workers and a much more educated workforce, and not saddling them with their first, what would have been their first house, which was why I argue part of what's going on with our economy is you don't have that next generation one getting that entry level job and buying that first house and that first everything else that comes with it. They're still living at home with mom and dad or in some apartment.
Right. And I mean, some of that is definitely the recession. I think you've seen some like really relieving news in the last few months. I mean, you've seen, I think it was yesterday I saw this report about millennials are finally starting to buy cars. It turns out that cars are not actually totally unappealing to people. It's just that they're expensive, and millennials have been broke because they've been in the labor market when it's been terrible. So as that's starting to get a little back to normal, hopefully we'll start to see, people who are done with their adolescent years really enter adulthood, as opposed to sort of skipping along, waiting for the economy to let them, start real life.
Right. A couple of the other things I did like about the some of the findings in this, and if folks want to take a look at it, I've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Just click on Michael Matowitz's name; it'll take you right there. You can look at what the Inclusive Prosperity Commission has come up with. Some of the bullet points. I think there's some good stuff in this. One, limiting executive compensation is not a bad idea to take a look at, and also some of the tax breaks that we hand out, and this investment that we're making in job creation, I think should have some kind of a return.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of rationale for job creation in these tax cuts is it's really on the front burner when they're trying to sell the tax cut. You'll generally notice that it's not really the people who've done a lot of analysis of the actual tax policy that are doing that. It's usually the lobbyists who are really pushing for that.
Right.
I think that's given us a tax code that spends an awful lot of money on things that aren't very productive but help out some people a lot. And obviously if I were a dictator for a day, I would change the tax code considerably. But we think that there's actually, some of these things are so egregious that people will actually be able to form some political consensus to get rid of a few of them. And that's sort of, given the political world we live in right now, I feel like that's the best we can ask for. Right. Sort of big committee document like this.
No. I mean, and there's some good stuff in here. A couple of my problems, and I will finish up where my problems are. One of the things is modernizing employment laws around overtime pay. That means the flexibility stuff that they keep talking about. Work somebody 100 hours one week and then nothing the next week. That bothers me. I also talk about workers' compensation, unemployment, and other protections. And I love this language, to recognize the changing nature of work and to provide basic economic security to workers. I gotta know what those changes are to workers' comp and unemployment and all of those things, because when I see changes to that stuff, it's rarely very good for workers.
No, you make a really good point there. I mean, I think that when we're talking about that, we're basically saying, most of our employment law was written around the idea that, this really does come from almost like the World War II era, when, a lot of people would be in a union, they'd be with the company for a long time. The company and the worker had a lot of incentive to invest together to make workers smarter, better at their jobs, more productive. And now that you have a smaller share of the population's unionized, we know that unionized employees tend to stay with companies longer. We also know in general, the amount of time companies and workers spend together has declined. And, you start thinking about the incentives here, it makes it really, really hard to come up with a system where employers and employees have the same interest at heart like they used to. And so, our thought process is, it's sort of an unspoken assumption in all these policies that, that's kind of the workplace we were dealing with. And, at least for the foreseeable future, that is not the workplace we have.
Right.
And so my hope would be that we're moving in the direction that it sounds like you'd like us to be moving. And that's certainly the intent of the report, is to say, look, if I'm not going to have a job with the same company for 20 years, if I'm going to have, I'm just going to make up a number. If I make up a number, if I, for example, if on average people change jobs every 3 years, well, then maybe that company shouldn't be in charge of planning my entire retirement for me. Maybe, that's a role for some other entity that
Right.
is going to have a longer term relationship with me to,
No, I completely understand that. But, at the end of the day, we moved away from what my grandparents came back from World War II and built. We moved away from that because I would argue policy changes, and those same policy changes that we've changed to get here, I think we can tweak to go back and maybe not go back, but to at least rebuild that social contract again.
Yeah, I mean, I think
just a
that's,
thought.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think what we're all after here is a better social contract, and I'm not picky about how we get there, but I'm very picky about what it looks like.
There you go. And I would love to hear more about that as the weeks and months pass. We'd love to have you back here on the program, Michael. It was great talking with you, and I appreciate the work that you guys do over there.
It was a pleasure, man. I hope to talk to you soon.
All righty. Thanks so much. Michael Matowitz, economist over at the Center for American Progress, AmericanProgress.org. If you want to take a look at the points on the Inclusive Prosperity Commission's report, we've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, it's time to talk.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
A longtime Washington PR flack for tobacco giants, labor exploiters, frackers, and other corporate profiteers celebrates himself as Dr. Evil, the scourge of all progressive groups. But Rick Berman is not a doctor, not evil, and not a scourge. While he is a wholly unprincipled little man, he's just a self-serving huckster who grubs for corporate dollars by offering to do their dirty PR work. Berman's modus operandi is not exactly sophisticated. Taking money from the likes of Philip Morris, Monsanto, and Tyson Foods, he sets up tax-exempt front groups with nondescript names like Center for Consumer Freedom, Employment Policies Institute, and Environmental Policy Alliance, posing them as independent research outfits. Each one is an empty shell, run by his small staff out of his Washington, D.C. office. Using the names of the front groups, Berman and Company buy full-page newspaper ads and write opinion pieces that amount to raw hatchet attacks on whatever progressive groups or public policies the corporate funders want to kill. His mad dog style is hardly worrisome to those targeted, for rather than drawing converts to the corporate funders' cause, it merely rallies the usual anti-labor, anti-enviro, anti-fill-in-the-blank crowd. But it still appeals to brand-name corporate clients, for Berman promises to spew their message into the media without having any of the nastiness stick to them. We run all this stuff through nonprofit organizations that are insulated from having to disclose donors, he assured energy executives last year. There is total anonymity, he bragged. People don't know who supports us. This is Jim Hightower saying, but big holes in his curtain of anonymity are now revealing some of the corporations hiding behind it. To take a peek, go to www.bermanexposed.org.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Would you dive 14 feet deep in the Susquehanna to keep a bridge safe? Would you spend night after night with prisoners to keep your community safe? Would you spend Christmas Eve plowing snow to keep roads safe? AFSCME members do. Men and women who choose to serve in public service. Mine inspectors, 911 dispatchers, healthcare workers, parole agents. You may not think about them, but no, they're all thinking about you. This message brought to you by AFSCME Council 13.
Exposing GOP half-truths, lies, and hypocrisy every weeknight from 9 to midnight. Rick Smith.
Why can't we be friends? Why can't we be friends? Why can't we be friends? Why can't we be friends?
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Good news for the president. While I do beat him up for not pushing the increase in the minimum wage, good news on the Obamacare front. Yeah, that's right. On one hand, you've got the YouTube phenom Tea Party Jim Webb saying, "I love me my Obamacare." Well, the numbers are in. The Kaiser Health tracking poll was released today. And what they've found is right now, Obamacare is seeing its highest approval rating in more than 2 years. For the first time since the fall of 2012, those who say they support the health care law is now greater than those who oppose it. The margin, it's within the margin of error, but 43% support it, 42% oppose it. And you go, well, that's not great, but it's better than it's been. And this is what the right wing is scared to death over. They are scared to death that people like Jimmy Webb, the Tea Party guy who, I love me my Obamacare, that's what they're afraid of. Scared to death. Scared. Because, that's government working. That's we the people doing for ourselves collectively what we are not able to do individually. And that scares the living bejeebas out of the right wing, because they've spent so much time, so much energy in telling us that government's bad. Some government's bad, especially the ones run by the Bush administration. Some run by Republicans in the state House and in the state Senate. Basically any body run by conservatives seems to be the ones that are most dysfunctional, at least for you and me. Very functional in making sure that the wealth class well-heeled. And as I look at this Inclusive Prosperity Commission report, and look, there, right when at the beginning, and I saw Larry Summers' name, that's where you're going to go, no, as I did, honestly. And then I started reading through it, and there are some very good things in there. The collective bargaining part of it to me is huge. The fact that we want to encourage people to join and form unions, I think, is a pretty important thing. When you start talking about limiting the tax deductions for executive compensation, I think that's a pretty good thing. I think when you start talking about the time, the time between option investing and exercising stock options, I think that's probably not a bad idea. Maybe maybe have the revisit the idea of the SEC regulating corporate stock buybacks. There's an idea. I think we just talked about what's going on in the world of corporate buybacks as the handful of these big CEOs are buying back their shares, pumping up the price, and of course firing their workforce. And I think, as Michael pointed out there at the end, it really is about reinvigorating that social contract. That we're all in this together in one frame or another, and it's not just hooray for me and well, good luck for the rest of us. Just kind of a thought. And, the more I look at this, we're going to see a lot of these kind of reports popping up. And my fear, especially when I saw Larry Summers' name, is that you're going to get the corporate spin angle on this. And when I saw, we need to modernize workers' compensation and we need to modernize employment laws, my radar went up, and I'm thinking, okay, modernize. What do you mean by modernize? You mean make people work 100 hours in 1 week, not pay them overtime, and then, we won't work you next week? Is that what we're talking about when we're talking about modernizing workers' comp? Is it like they're doing in Texas, where you still can't sue the company, but sorry, you're out of luck? Is it the unemployment compensation that we're seeing in other states across this country, where they're limiting the number of weeks you can take at like 12? There's a serious problem in the language, in my view, and stuff that you have to be keenly aware of and paying attention to as this language pops up. So like I said, immediately we saw Larry Summers' name, very guarded. But, all in all, I think there's some very good things in here that we should be pursuing forthright, especially the organizing part of it. And that's going to come back down to, people talking to their neighbors and their friends and their coworkers and pushing back against this anti-union sentiment that the right wing seems to have taken as their battle cry. And it's going to take us pushing back against that nonsense. Anyway, if you've missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally. Looking forward to the next hour. Cute little video the folks over at AFSCME has put forth, talking about pensions, as the billionaire there wants to destroy pensions and, well, hand them over to Wall Street. Have we heard that before? Just destroy it and give it to Wall Street. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Help the poorest folks, but it only brought more money to their hands. And the poor keep getting poorer. People turn away, not able to admit the way they planned. It's taking all the soul away from everything they grew. They can't handle it on which to stand.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham.
When it comes to politics, especially in this day and age, it simply makes no sense to put all of our eggs in one political basket. The days of our union being viewed as a handmaiden for one political party or the pawn in somebody else's political game must come to an end.
North American Building Trades President Sean McGarvey. McGarvey delivered the keynote speech at the Building Trades 2015 Legislative Conference Monday here in Washington, D.C. McGarvey's message was to think more strategically when it comes to politics and internal mobilization of building trades union members. He says building trades members are split roughly 60-40 between Democrats and Republicans, and the American political reality is purple tinged with red.
Brothers and sisters, all I'm saying is it's time for us to start playing a new game. And we can't do this overnight. But 10 years from now, the economic well-being of our members should no longer be dependent on who occupies the White House, a governor's mansion, a state legislature, or the United States Congress, because we have constructed building trades majorities at all levels of government.
McGarvey says the building trades are not climate change deniers, despite sometimes being on the opposite side of issues with the environmental movement.
And let me be clear, when it comes to the building trades and the environment, first off, we are not climate change deniers. Our unions have consistently been in favor of a balanced region global solution that puts us on a path to address the serious nature of climate change, but does so in a manner that does not destroy the American middle class and the ability of our members to ply their crafts.
McGarvey says the building trades are on a positive trajectory, having added 53,000 members in 2014. The International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers says that its efforts to organize the South Carolina Boeing plant are far from over, despite the union's withdrawal of a petition for an April 22nd union election. The IAM says 2 of its organizers were threatened at gunpoint during worker home visits. The union also cited a toxic environment and gross violations of workers' rights as the reasons that it's postponing an election. The IAM says Boeing's campaign of rumors and threats may have succeeded in delaying the union election, but the fight to win collective bargaining rights for thousands of Boeing South Carolina workers is far from over.
Workers Independent News is brought to you by the American Federation of Teachers and its 1.6 million members working to reclaim the promise of public education, healthcare, and public services for our students, their families, and our communities. More information online at aft.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
I've teamed up with the Pew Charitable Trust to talk about a real need. The need to save our public workers from retirement security. Nurses, firefighters, and librarians pay into a pension system their entire lives and expect to get that money back when they retire. Together, we can change this.
Yes, together we can change all of that. You know, we really want that desperation class of the good old days of the 80s and 90s. You know, back to the 1880s, 1890s, where you worked until the day you dropped. Yeah, that's where we want to go back to. Or at least that's where the folks who occupy the rarefied air up in the billionaire class. That's where they want to take us. And I look at this guy, this Bill Adolph, who's spending tons of money on this Pew Charitable Trust, a whole bunch of this stuff, trying to convince us that we don't need that stuff anymore, which is why I've asked Jane Carter. She's a labor economist over at the good folks at AFSCME, the people who put out the little clip there. Really great video, and I highly suggest taking a look at it. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I look at this little clip you got, funny and all of that, but really very dire consequences if these folks get what they want.
Oh yeah, I think John Arnold is a figure that a lot of folks have never heard of, but they've probably seen some of his mailers if they've been in pension fights. Some of politicians who are out to kind of destroy pensions and retirement security in this country, they've probably received money from him and his foundation. And he's been around for a few years, but no one's really heard of this guy until recently.
Yeah, I think I got his name wrong. What was his name again?
His name is John Arnold.
John Arnold. What?
Yeah, he's reportedly the second youngest billionaire. Yeah, he's a former Enron trader, so made a lot of money off of previously destroying folks' pensions and the economy, and now continuing that.
Well,
that
I mean,
endeavor.
I guess for him, you do what works, right?
I guess when you're rich, 40, in your 30s and you're a billionaire, and you got nothing else but time on your hands. But John Arnold actually goes after it's not necessarily to destroy pensions. He calls it to stabilize the funding system behind it, which in reality is shifting it to a 401k style where Wall Street bankers are going to get massive amounts of fees and be able to profit even more than they do typically when you invest in pensions.
So what is this? I mean, explain this. You're the economist here, because I'm still struggling with these people who are still out there pimping me these 401ks. I got to be honest. It's been what, 30 some years now, and the vast majority of people that I know that have them have virtually nothing in them, and they really, I mean, it hasn't worked. Why are we continuing to push this stuff?
Well, let's be honest about it. A lot of the crisis in the retirement security field started, right at the same time the financial crisis was hitting the country, but it started in the pension systems prior to that, and it wasn't because the workers were not contributing. It was not because the stock market was not doing well. It was because the employers typically were using the income that the fund was garnering as their contribution rather than actually paying into the system itself. And so going into the financial crisis that swept this country in 2008, you had pension systems that were probably already facing an uphill battle, and then the crisis hit us, and so it took a huge sweep across the system. That's just the pension system. You look at 401ks, and they were decimated in this country. On average, someone who's looking to retire in 10 years only has about $31,000 in their 401k. So, I mean, I don't see how someone can work an additional 10 years and make up for retirement security. And after about 2010, the Wall Street reports that more than $3 trillion in wages and savings was lost.
Wow.
Significant economic impacts, not just to retirees, but to our economies, our local economies as well.
So, I look at this and this whole push towards, because really the public sector is one of the last bastions of folks who still have these mythical things that our grandparents used to have, those old fashioned things, those defined benefit pensions, because we're so much more enlightened today. We have these 401ks. Only my grandmother, who's still retired, still collects that pension that she worked for back in the 60s and 70s to this day.
Right. Well, I mean, there's two points on that. Public employees, it's kind of a trade-off. You for wages that are typically lower in the public sector than the private sector, we have negotiated for better health care and better retirement security. But I think the myth that's out there that our members have these big golden parachutes is absolutely fabricated. On average, an AFSCME member is only getting about a $19,000 a year pension, which isn't significant. And when we look at cities that have underfunded their pension system, when our workers, our members, by law had to pay in every single paycheck into that system,
right,
but the employer did not, that's just not fair. And it's a breach of contract, but it's not their fault. And $19,000 a year, one, isn't enough to retire and have a sustained retirement on, and two, is not bankrupting this country.
Exactly what you laid out there is the pension situation here in Pennsylvania. The state didn't make contributions for years and instead decided, hey, let's give tax breaks to companies and let's leave the Delaware loophole open and let's not raise taxes or pay our bills. Let's just push it off, kick the can down the road, because and I got to believe that this was a planned, that this was foresaw, thought out, that you create a crisis, a manufactured crisis, and then you go, oh, we have the Tina mentality. There's no alternative. We have to do what we were allowed to do in the private sector, and that is steal the retirement security of our workers. And well, tough luck, buddy.
Right. It seems like like you said earlier, it's that public employees are the kind of the last workers to have kind of this guaranteed benefit after retirement. But again, it's because they paid into it over time. It's not something that's just given to them. It's something that was definitely earned that they paid into. And you have state legislatures and governors all across this country that refuse to pay their share as well, be it what the actuary had recommended at the time, or even a set standard that was required by law. And we're able to find other loopholes and not sufficiently fund it, giving them kind of the out to say we should move to 401ks. But I look at my friends and my niece and my nephew, and I have to wonder if that's the trend we're going into. I can only imagine what retirement security and the crisis that we're facing, what it's going to look like for them when they're my age or when they're close to retirement as well.
Well, there'll be no retirement. I mean, we're going back to the good old days of the 80s and 90s. The 1880s and 1890s,
yes.
where you worked until you dropped,
right?
Or you lived with your children, or the billionaire class is really redefining what the American experience is, and we love to talk about how exceptional we are. I don't know that that's the grand calling card for American exceptionalism, going back to those days.
Well, even these states that still have pensions, they have been able to disclose the fees that they pay private equity firms. So, I mean, it's not just because we've been able to stave off some of these attacks and retain the retirement security for hardworking folks all across the country, like in New Jersey and California, you still have these private equity firms that by law do not have to disclose how much they actually get. And so in some places, like in New Jersey or in California, $440 million going to these equity firms. In Jersey, it's $600 million. Wow. So even though we've been able to retain that retirement security, when you look at the way, if the other side didn't win, they found another way to try to come after the pension system itself.
And at the end of the day, maybe you'll disagree, but I think this is really all just about bilking us for fees like they've gotten away with. I mean, I've looked at my 401k statements, I've looked at my IRA statements, and boy, they're forever taking their bite, and they get their bite whether I make money or not.
Right. And I mean, you mentioned it earlier too. It's this constant kind of attack from every direction. And John Arnold and his foundation, the Arnold Foundation, have been at this for the past few years and really kind of went on the rampage, not necessarily on the fees part, but trying to dismantle the pension system in California. And they teamed up with some of their allies in the State Policy Network group that is linked to the Koch brothers and the American Legislative Exchange Council it's called the California Pacific Research Institute. They went to a summit that was hosted by the Reason Foundation in May of 2013, and the title of their meeting was actually the California or Overcoming the Opposition, anticipating and addressing government union opposition in discussing pension reform.
I got to tell you, they are much better at the message than I think most of the folks on the left and the average everyday working person. The Reason Foundation, you're gonna get hemlock, you're gonna die of poisoning, but it's coming from the Reason Foundation, so you should be much happier with that. I mean, the messaging that comes out is just so. Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's changed the dialogue in this country from rather than looking at your neighbor thinking, oh, that's great, you have a pension, I want one too. It's turning neighbor on neighbor and worker on worker in these attacks. That I gave up my pension, you should give up yours too. But for a lot of our public employees, we give up a higher standard of wage to get better retirement benefits or better healthcare benefits, and it's a trade-off. And it shouldn't be about that. Everyone in this country should be concerned about the retirement crisis we're facing, and should be looking for solutions that are more along the lines of a defined benefit plan where you know what you're going to have to retire on, rather than kind of throwing it out and putting your money in a wishing well on Wall Street.
Yeah, let's hope some corporate criminals don't crash the economy again, and you end up losing all of your savings, and end up, not even be able to afford cat food. And that's, it's sad to say, but I'm looking down the road, and I'm looking, I'm in my late 40s, and I'm looking at some of my friends who are in the same time frame in life, and we're going, are we going to be able to ever retire like our parents and grandparents did? And it's not just a handful of people anymore. It's an entire generation. And as you've said, I worry about my kids and their future because really there's nothing.
Right. I mean, it's difficult, and when you invest on Wall Street, you're taking a gamble. And I know with my retirement, I don't want to do that. And if you ever truly do want to make mass amounts of money and be like an Enron billionaire at the end of the day, you have to have a lot of money to invest in. When you have an average working American, they do not make the same amount of money to make money on Wall Street like John Arnold does. So having a defined benefit plan gives you something that you're contributing to, that your employer is contributing to, that you therefore know what you're going to have in the end, and you can make a thoughtful planning process and retire comfortably. And probably not even that on $19,000 a year, let's be honest here. But it gives you an idea of what you're going to get out of it, instead of, thinking that for the next 20 years of your life, you only have $31,000 to live off of.
Yeah. See, for me, this discussion we're having should then lead to that next discussion, which is we should be saving the pensions of these folks who paid into it, and they're absolutely deserving of it because they worked for it. They're contracted for it. This is, we used to believe in contracts in this country, but the other discussion that has to be had is how do we make sure that everyone has retirement security instead of having people trying to go after and attack Social Security. I've often said maybe we should be expanding that. Maybe we should do here in Pennsylvania like they did in California, expand PSERS and SERS and allow more people to buy into the public pensions so that we broaden it out a little bit, make it a little bit more financially secure, but also give more people the benefit.
Well, to be completely honest, from a financial perspective, that's the reason pensions actually are a safer bet, not just because you know what you're getting out of it, but a pension system as a whole is able to survive, so to speak, through a brawl with Wall Street like we just went through, unlike a 401k. With a 401k, you're on your own. You are typically opting for different selections on where you want your money invested. It also comes with fees, but in a pension system, you know what you're contributing into it, and it can weather a storm much better than an individual can on Wall Street because you've got a large group of people into one system able to handle the kind of the rocky road, so to speak.
That's one of those things. Again, I'm not a financial guru. I'm not an economist like you, but I don't have time to sit and watch where all of my investments are going and what I'm going to invest my little bit of 401k money in. And that's what they plan on, isn't it? I mean, they make it easier for them to bilk you and to rip you off every chance they get.
Well, let's be honest. Our members are not stupid. They're not stupid. They get this. Wall Street, though, is an intimidating place. And to be completely honest, I don't care how smart you are. You taking your money and going and gambling on Wall Street when you're making, the salary of a middle class American, that's just not the smartest thing to do. That's why a pension system and a pension and contributing to your pension at the rate that we typically do is a much better shot than gambling it away. I mean, you might as well just go to Vegas at that point.
Yeah, I think you got better odds at Vegas. So let me ask you this. I want to go back to the little video. What kind of response have you gotten from it?
I think we've gotten a lot of good response from it. A lot of, like I said earlier, a lot of people are not aware of who John Arnold is and his contributions, and his kind of behind the scenes push to quote unquote reform pensions in this country. He's not just going after our pensions. He's kind of linked himself up with education reform, pushing schools and funding for schools away from public oversight into private hands and private operations. He's pushed money, and the sad thing is by using an organization like the Pew Charitable Trust, it gives it some sort of credibility. A few years ago, John Arnold came out with the researchers at his foundation saying there's a $1 trillion pension crisis in this country, which scared the Jesus out of a lot of people. And it was farcical. It wasn't true. Was it close to that? Probably. It's now been estimated it's probably about a $700 million deficit, but it's not this crisis that they portray it to be, where that it should be on every state budget or city council's line item at the end of the day, because it's a pension system. It rolls, it weathers the Wall Street, every year, every decade. So it's by putting funding behind it, as you mentioned earlier, messaging behind it, they're winning the hearts and minds and terrifying the bejesus out of people, thinking there is truly this crisis that's unsurmountable.
It's one of those things that just blows my mind. But one of the clips I wanted to leave folks with from the video, and I highly suggest taking a look at the little video. It's a couple minutes long, and I liked it. I've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. It was one of those, one of those things, just kind of introducing himself and what he had to say.
I'm a billionaire. Funding a foundation that pays its employees 6 figures for a project designed to steal librarians' pensions. Classic. You can help for just $40 million. You can help dismantle the pension system in your state and help us build a more expensive, less secure plan that profits Wall Street.
There you go. I think he laid it out pretty well.
Right. Yeah, our communication staff, they're I think the finest in the labor movement.
That's fantastic stuff. But Jane, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much for filling us in, keeping us informed, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks, brother. Take care.
All righty. Jane Carter, labor economist over at AFSCME. Quick break, right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Just go be
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1894. The nation was in the grips of depression. Unemployment soared. Workers' wages and hours were cut dramatically in virtually every industry. Coal miners were especially hard hit. At a meeting in Columbus, Ohio, the United Mine Workers of America called for a nationwide strike. Even though the union had only about 20,000 official members, more than 6 times that many walked off the job. The strike stretched from Washington state to Alabama to the Appalachian coal fields. Violent skirmishes broke out when scab workers attempted to enter the mines and replace the striking miners. One such example occurred near Uniontown, Pennsylvania, where armed guards killed 5 striking workers and wounded 8 more. In 5 states, the militia was called out due to the unrest. Where the strikers were not able to turn away the scab labor, they employed a different tactic. They attempted to stop the delivery of the mined coal. In Illinois, for example, striking miners piled railroad ties and other debris on the railroad tracks to stop the coal trains from running. This interference with the trains meant that the federal government had the justification it needed to enter the struggle. A U.S. judge ordered an end to stopping train traffic. The New York Times declared the power of the federal government being behind the writ, all the force necessary to move the train will be used. The strike stretched on for weeks, but in the end, the strikers could not combat the coal mine owners, local militias, hired security, and scab labor. The strike was broken. The United Mine Workers faced a severe setback to their organizing that was not overcome for more than 2 decades. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
In hindsight, the new strategy was flawed, complex, poorly reviewed, poorly executed, and poorly monitored. Just because we're stupid doesn't mean everybody else was. It is very unfortunate. It plays right into all the hands of a bunch of pundits out there, but that's life. We'll have to deal with that. Just because we're stupid doesn't mean everybody else was.
Come crashing down. Oh, I want to be in the number when the banks come crashing down.
I gotta be honest, I don't know that I want to be in that number when the banks go crashing down again. And look, when you give these billionaire types, when you give them the kind of power and control that they crave, that they're demanding, because hey, they're the smart folks, right? They're the ones who know how to do all this stuff. And when a guy from Enron, and this, I guess this should be the first part of it. When a guy from Enron says, hey, listen to me on pensions, somebody should smack him across the back of the head and say, just shut up and go away. But here's the thing. I mean, you're talking about, these very wealthy people, these almost, our blue bloods, our aristocracy, the oligarch of our nation. These folks who think, hey, they know everything. And it's their way. And I got to be honest, it's scary stuff because the world that they envision, the world that they're setting up for the rest of us, not good stuff. And I love how the right, and you got to give the right wing credit. You got to give the corporatists credit. They're very good at advertising. They're very good at, spinning the message. Well, you're smarter than the next guy, and you should be able to do better than that next guy because you can spend all day long looking at a computer monitor and figuring out where you're going to put your $20. And this is what they've done, look, masterfully. They've convinced average everyday working people that you can gamble on Wall Street and win. You can be a day trader. I remember before the collapse, I had a bunch of friends who were doing the day trader thing. They were putting their $3,000 or $4,000 here and there, and they're constantly moving stuff around without really realizing that they were being feed to death. Every time they trade, they'd pay, I think it was like $8 or $10, but they were doing a bunch of them, and they were making a little bit of money, and they were thrilled because I made $20 today, or I made $100 today, and that's great. But the average everyday citizen doesn't have time for that. The great thing about a defined benefit pension plan, and I look at my grandparents. My grandfather had an 8th grade education. My grandmother finished high school, but they were not financial geniuses. They worked hard. They played by the rules. They squirreled a little bit of money away for, when they retired, but they had their union pension plan. And my grandmother, to this day, still collects the pension that she worked for. She retired back, I think, 85, 86. So here she is all these years later, still collecting that. It's like $500 or $600 a month. Would she have gotten that with the 401k had they put that money away? And the answer is no. She would have never. She would have outlived her money. And then what? And that's the thing that no one ever seems to have an answer for. Then what? We've all got these 401ks. Wow, they're fantastic. I got, $20, $30, $50,000 in a 401k. You can't retire on that. You can't put that in an annuity and get back a sustaining, livable income. You just can't. So when the principle's all gone, then what? What's the answer? Where do they see us going? And the answer is they don't care. It's about feeding the friends on Wall Street. It's about putting money in their pocket, and it's about hooray for them. And well, the hell for you, hell with you and me. The end of the road for us, and that's really a struggle. I'm telling you, it's because I was just reading not too long ago. The average 401k in this country has about $18,000 in it. And so when we get to that retirement age, when we get to that place down the road where the vast majority of working people who were in years past had a little defined pension because of the unionization efforts of the 30s and 40s, they had a little bit of pension. They had a little squirreled away. They had a little Social Security. They could cobble together a reasonable retirement like my grandmother's doing. Social Security is under attack. You've got the right wing, the Reason people, and the common, the Commonwealth Foundation, and the state policy networks, and all of these right wing billionaire funded front groups out there shilling for, let's put Social Security on Wall Street. Let's put your pensions on Wall Street. Let's be completely dependent on the people who crashed our economy in 2008. And let's listen to them, the people who've had such great success for the folks that they've handled. Now they've done well for themselves, and that's the gig. That's the game. They've done well for themselves. They have the money to go out and promote themselves. Thus, I'm rich. Basically, what was the old saying that behind every great billionaire is a great crime. And that's the reality. I mean, you look at all of the money that was lost due to the collapse in 2008, but not just that one. You go back to every one of these dips, these recessions, these computer glitch. Who benefits? The institutions, they do fine. The people who know the game and play the float, they do just fine. It's the workers who lose because they've conned us. They've conned us into believing that we can go to the Wall Street casino with our $20 and we can win. And every once in a while, they throw out the guy who did win without mentioning the millions of people who have lost. And that's really the sad reality. And, it's much like, you look at this, it's much like our trade policies. Right now they're pushing this Trans-Pacific Partnership free trade agreement, and they're pushing it hard. And, I was just reading a story about Nancy Pelosi, who's kind of in a tough spot because Nancy wants to be, she wants to be loyal to the president. She has said that she's seeking a pathway to yes, while most of the people in her caucus are saying, no, this is horrible. This is NAFTA on steroids. Haven't we learned our lessons? And, the article was pretty interesting in that, Nancy's in a tough spot. Because, look, there are some Democrats, the corporate Democrats who want it, but, the liberal Democrats are going, wait a second. Our folks, the people who care about workers, they're going, our folks are going to get hurt by this. We're going to lose millions of jobs and wages are going to be lower, but I know corporate profits will be fine. And we're going to have this, this secret tribunal for the big corporations so they can usurp U.S. law and get away from us and not be accountable to us. And to me, that's the big part of this. The wealth class in this country and the corporate class, they're really trying to not just take control here, but to not be held accountable here. They want all the benefits, they want everything here, but not so much the accountability. As we're seeing with the whole push towards privatized courts, the whole push towards privatize and internationalizing disputes, because they can sue any government they want now because they've got a mechanism. And that should scare you and me and, oh yeah, we the people. Because this trade deal, this is a bad one. And I know that there's a little lipstick they're trying to put on this pig with the little TAA assistant, the trade adjustment assistance. It's not enough. And for me, again, it comes down to the priorities. And stop and think about it. Top to bottom, the priorities as a nation that we've pursued, be it on pensions, be it on trade, be it on employment law, be it wherever you want, regulations, the environment, wherever you're talking, the corporate interest, the corporate money has the loudest voice. They're the big players in the room. And the rest of us kind of be damned. That should, whether you're right, left, center, Tea Party, liberal, libertarian, that should scare the hell out of you. That should scare you to no end, that these corporate giants all they care about is the bottom line. It should scare you that they have this kind of power and control. And with this trade agreement, I got to be honest, not good. Not good stuff. And, we were told, and look, I've said this before, I sat 20 feet from the president when he said, you can trust me on this. No chorus, no Colombia, no Panama. And what do we got? We got Colombia, we've got chorus and Panama. And the South Korean free trade agreement is killing our steel industry. It's killing the tubular steel industry like we talked about yesterday because they're dumping. And we knew that was going to happen. And all the voices were saying, this is what's going to happen. We know it's going to happen. Same thing here with this Trans-Pacific Partnership free trade agreement. We know what's going to happen. We've seen this movie. We've seen it over and over and over again. And, the ending isn't going to be any different. It's just going to be worse. Like many of the sequels. When you get down, Godfather 1 was great. Godfather 3, not so good. Had they made a Godfather 4, that's the Trans-Pacific Partnership Free Trade Agreement. Just a nightmare. So I say, call your representatives, call your congressman, call your senator, call Pat Toomey, and say, look, no. Renegotiate this thing. There are better ways of doing trade. We're not anti-trade. We're just anti-this because this is not about trade. Let's take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
We have to take into account all of the costs of not doing this.
Ontario, Canada launches cap-and-trade system to fight global warming.
We aren't thinking critically about the impacts of where the money of Harvard's endowment is going.
Students push Harvard to divest from fossil fuels. New poll finds majority of Americans support a tax on carbon emissions. Plus, the last male white rhino on Earth is now under 24-hour armed guard.
Wow, all of that and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
And when my granddaughter Olivia looks at me and says, Grandma, what did you do? What I'm not going to say to her, I put my head in the sand, and so I didn't take an initiative that would have saved the planet for your grandchildren. I'm not going to do that.
Oh, why not? Everyone else is. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, it's Earth Day coming up, but as we like to say every year here at the Green News Report, it's Earth Day every day.
Yeah, check out any of the tens of thousands of events around the world celebrating the only known planet in the universe to support life.
Speaking of which, what do you have for us today?
Citizens around the world are rising up to demand action on climate change. In Canada, tens of thousands marched across Canada this week to demand government action on global warming in advance of a climate summit held by Canada's provincial governors. In spite of heavy criticism from the Conservative Harper administration, which is trying to exploit Canada's fossil fuel reserves, Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne announced her province is launching a carbon cap-and-trade system to cut greenhouse gas emissions. She explained why in a press conference.
If we step back and we say, well, we can't do this because potentially there might be an impact that might be negative in one particular sector, that would be irresponsible. If we put our heads in the sand and we say, well, climate change it's not a problem that we can tackle right now. It's too risky. It's too politically fraught. We're just afraid to do it. That would not be responsible.
Cap and trade allows companies a limited amount of greenhouse gas emissions, and if a company has a leftover allowance, then it can sell that to companies that have gone over the limit. Ontario joins British Columbia and Quebec in now linking up to California's booming carbon trading market, which has already earned California nearly $1 billion.
Some critics have regarded cap and trade plans as a scheme, as opposed to a more simple carbon tax, a tax on emissions.
There are two different systems. Cap and trade actually deals directly with industries, whereas a carbon tax deals with everybody.
So everybody pays that tax, but that tax is then refunded to consumers for residential use.
It depends on how it's constructed. It doesn't have to go back to households. The revenue can be distributed in a number of ways. In America, a new poll has found that 67% of those polled supported that simple kind of carbon tax in which the biggest polluters pay and the revenue goes back to households. In the U.S., a divestment movement is gaining steam. At Harvard University this week, students blockaded university buildings, demanding that Harvard University divest its $36 billion endowment of all holdings in the fossil fuel industry.
Wait, $36 billion Harvard invests in stuff?
Yes, not all of that in fossil fuels, but it is the largest endowment in the United States.
Wow, that's amazing. So if Harvard pulls their money out of fossil fuels, that's a lot of money that will not be invested in those companies.
That's right. And in an interview with Democracy Now!, Divest Harvard student leader Talia Rothstein says civil disobedience became necessary.
We've been repeatedly refused open dialogue of the kind we feel this issue deserves. They refused to engage on this issue and inevitably had to resort to civil disobedience to put as much public pressure on the Harvard administration as possible.
Just a reminder, it was divestments like that eventually got South Africa to end its apartheid regime. So we'll see if they have the same kind of effect here on the fossil fuel industry.
And good news, the race for clean energy has passed a turning point. Bloomberg News reports that around the world, more capacity for renewable energy is being built each year than coal, natural gas, and oil combined.
Nice. I like it.
Meanwhile, a heartbreaking story out of Africa. The last male northern white rhinoceros on the entire planet. There's literally only one male left. He has been placed under 24-hour armed guard in Sudan. He's one of only 5 remaining white rhinos in the world. The last male white rhino's horn has been amputated to deter poachers who have hunted all rhino species to near extinction in Africa because rhino body parts are highly prized in China.
Wow. So as soon as that one guy is gone,
that's it for the species.
Wow. For much more on all of the stories we covered today and the ones we couldn't get to, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebook and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
One is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. 2 can be as bad as 1. It's the loneliest number since the number 1.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Oh, well, looks like Ted Cruz has stepped into it. I guess today he had to admit that he may have possibly kind of misspoken when he said that he had basically done some arm twisting of Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman John McCain on the issue of allowing service people to carry firearms on military bases. Evidently, according to John McCain, it's fascinating to hear because he says, I haven't heard a thing about it from him, nor has my staff heard from his staff. Where did that come from? I have not a clue, says John McCain. But McCain said he'd love to talk about the issue and have a hearing and do all of that stuff. Had only Mr. Cruz bothered to ask, instead of just kind of blurting it out there saying, I've done this. You're going to see a lot of this, so get used to it. And we will continue to bring it to you. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world. Luke Vargas back from his long stint on vacation, and I'm sure a much-needed one. Talk Radio News Services, Luke Vargas. Thanks for taking time for us, Luke.
Hey, you bet. I always enjoy it. And apologies in advance for the alarms. There seems to have been sort of a parade of ambulances going by the UN today, including right now. So who knows what that's about.
Hopefully nothing horrible.
Yeah,
so how was, I guess first, how was the big vacation?
It was great. I was in Istanbul and then returned to Israel after being there for the elections, I guess last month in March. Really nice. I have to recommend both Turkey and Turkish Airlines, which was really hands down the best international flight experience by far that I have ever had. And that is really an endorsement I am not getting paid for, but would be happy to get paid for if they hear this and want to reach out. It was quite an experience.
We'll have to put out the feelers there. At least you weren't on Malaysian Air. That's all.
Correct. Or Ukrainian International, which I've been flying a lot recently, and gets you where you need to go, but not with very much style or comfort.
Yeah, that's where you just sit on a milk crate.
All they had was that single projection TV at the bulkhead of the whole main cabin. It sort of took me back to the 1990s, but a little bit old school, to say the least.
Well, it is what it is. So let's find out what's going on around the world. Some developments out of Yemen.
Yes, we learned on Monday that the U.S. Navy is moving an aircraft carrier and a missile cruiser that had been near Iraq, assisting with the mission against the Islamic State. They're now being moved off the coast of Yemen. People seem to be freaking out about this, though I'll point out the fact that there are already 9 American vessels in Yemen's waters, so this is not necessarily, in and of itself, a major sign of changing U.S. strategy. But what does seem to be changing is the way that the U.S. is talking about this. On Monday and over the weekend, we heard our naval presence off of Yemen is primarily about some power projection, also assisting Egyptian and Saudi boats that are there, but primarily to prevent piracy of the maritime trade in that region. This just doesn't hold too much water for me. If you've got already 3 major navies patrolling those waters, I'm pretty sure pirates got the word they should just go somewhere else.
Yeah.
It seems to me not to be the most viable excuse. And perhaps that was explained by the fact that today, Tuesday, we're learning a little bit more about what the mission might be about. There are 7 to 9 Iranian naval vessels heading from Iran purportedly to Yemen. We've heard some rumors that they might be carrying weapons. That would be a violation of resolutions at the UN against Iran and the weapons trade, but also a violation of UN Security Council sanctions on Yemen. So again, no independent verification of that rumor, but American officials are saying, look, we're putting them there so that they could be in a position to interdict, a word I had to look up for clarity, which means intercept or prevent the movement of those Iranian boats in the event they do have weapons. So again, I'm not sure exactly what would happen if we made that determination, if we would board them or try to physically stop them. But at the very least, we'd be in a position to know and be there to observe whether a bunch of weapons are being offloaded from these boats and likely going to the rebels who are trying to overthrow the government in Yemen.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And then what would happen to the big nuclear deal in the event that we did board their ships and whatever comes out of that?
That's exactly right. A lot of people have been looking at Iran the past few weeks and saying, look, they may not be actually trying to go to war or actually supplying arms, but they are sort of trying to publicize the fact that they have their hands in a whole lot of different countries, perhaps as a way of just saying, look, we haven't been completely humbled by this, possible deal with the West on the nuclear issue. We still exert our, force perhaps, but at least our foreign policy in a number of different places, regardless of who we're negotiating with on a single issue. So you could perhaps read into it that way. I'll also point out that there was a headline on Monday evening, which really caught a lot of people's attention. This was an exclusive from the Huffington Post, which said that back in late last year, when these Shia rebels called the Houthis that are fighting the Yemeni government, they had actually been warned by Iran not to attack the capital. They said, look, we understand that you could take over this capital. It's pretty poorly defended, but we don't think you should do it. Again, I'm not in a position to verify that report at all. The U.S. government has not commented on it quite yet, so they may by the time this program airs. But I'll say, it's really interesting because if this is true, it would really complicate the narrative that we've been told that Yemen is really just a proxy war, that it's Saudi Arabia versus Iran. And Saudi Arabia keeps saying the reason we're launching airstrikes, unfortunately, these airstrikes are really deadly against civilians too, as we learned today. But the reason we are so involved in Yemen is because Iran started this. They're the real aggressors. They've been meddling in this country and supporting rebels. If, in fact, they were warning this group not to attack the capital, it would show primarily that Iran isn't necessarily just obsessed, as we're told, with spreading Shia Islam around the world, that, they like to protect Shia peoples around the Middle East whenever possible, but it's not their top priority. It would also show that these rebels have priorities of their own, that if they're really rejecting demands or pleas from Iran, they're more focused on things on the ground, domestic reforms within Yemen, which is what they've been telling the West. So you take all of this together, it complicates the U.S. rationale for being in the region, perhaps. It definitely undercuts the Saudi argument that the whole reason they need to be so militant is because of Iranian interference. So again, we'll see how this plays out. Haven't heard any big reactions yet, but it does sort of prove what many, I've sort of thought for a while and what many analysts say, that this is not so clean of a conflict. It's not necessarily just a proxy war. There are a lot more things to take into consideration.
Yeah, but are there ever, these cut and dry, clean kind of things going on when you're talking about foreign relations?
So never. Case in point is the U.S. rationale in Yemen. This is a country that we've heard about mostly over the last few years, a country where our primary interest has been anti-terrorism. That's where we had our drone missions. We've been targeting Al-Qaeda there for a number of years. The presidents of Yemen that we really like are gone. And if you look just at the anti-terrorism, these Houthi rebels, in some ways, are sort of backing us up. They're fighting the Islamic State. They're actively fighting Al-Qaeda on a day-to-day basis. So, again, there are always these strange overlaps in interest. And Yemen is just another one of those countries.
Yeah, interesting. Let's move on to what's going on in Iraq. I see reports that the leader of the Islamic State was possibly injured seriously last month.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we might have talked about these same rumors back in November and December. I mean, it had leaked out that these airstrikes targeting buildings may have hit senior Islamic State leadership. According to a report by The Guardian this morning, they're saying that neither of those incidents back last year was true. They didn't actually hit Mr. Baghdadi, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of the Islamic State, but that a airstrike on a convoy last month on March 18th actually did hit him. The U.S. and the coalition didn't know he was in those cars, but The Guardian is citing both Iraqi military leaders and Western diplomats saying that he was very, very badly injured on March 18th, so much so that it was believed his wounds might kill him. And this is where it gets interesting. We try to see how a potential incident like this could maybe help us out, maybe help to expedite the crumbling of the Islamic State. And what we heard was that his injuries were so bad that those around him began to plot sort of how a transition of power would occur. And as we know, sometimes you can begin those discussions and then back out and nothing bad happens. But you do start to think, if this has introduced a little palace intrigue into this group, if it's made people who never thought they would come to power, that they could only come to power by being loyal to Baghdadi and then he would promote you or put him in his will. If by some, stroke of luck, they thought he was all on his way out, they might start getting at each other's throats, and it could create sort of a downward spiral in their own leadership. So we don't know exactly how this affects the group. We know the Islamic State was feared initially because they didn't use traditional communications. Messages were relayed by motorcycle couriers straight from Baghdadi and given out to his people in the field. But that during this period of injury, they've had to really change their power structure, empower more local councils to make decisions. So you put this all together, perhaps this has introduced a little bit of disarray, perhaps some power struggles within the Islamic State, and hopefully that works to the advantage of forces like the U.S. that are trying to get rid of this group.
Yeah, hopefully they eat each other and they start fighting each other because somebody wants to be on top, and you use that against them.
Precisely.
Also, let's move on. Evidently, what's going on with the did you see this collapse of this all these people? And where am I going with this?
Well, I'll take you back. So
hold
this
on,
was the major.
I got to stop that.
Go ahead.
Have you seen this migrant crisis that's going on in the Mediterranean?
Yes, this was actually my lead story from yesterday. It's hitting very close to home at the United Nations. All started, we could go back a few years as this migrant flood across the Mediterranean has increased. Last year there were 220,000 people, an absolutely staggering number, that attempted this very dangerous crossing of the Mediterranean. And what we've seen over the last few weeks is not just an increased number of boats leaving North Africa, particularly Libya, to head to Italy and Malta, but that there's just been horrible luck, it seems, and a lot more of these boats are getting overcrowded and sinking. On Sunday, the UN now says more than 800 people were killed. We had heard immediately after this capsizing that 25 people had been rescued. And the real hope was, we hear the news Monday, we hear the news Tuesday. Hopefully, because of how warm the waters were, we'd get a lot more people saved. 36 hours on, the total of people saved is now only 28. So only 3 people picked up in a day and a half. This is horrifying.
How desperate do you have to be? Because to use the word boat, I guess, is kind of generous. How desperate do you have to be to get on one of these vessels to sail to who knows where, and take that kind of a risk?
Well, we're starting to see, I guess, what you could call a manifest, though it certainly was never officially made by these smugglers, of who was on this boat. 350 Eritreans. This is that tiny East African country just north of Ethiopia. It was named today by the Committee to Protect Journalists as the most censored country on earth, emblematic of sort of the political and economic repression going on in that country. We've got Ethiopia, Gambia, Ivory Coast, Mali, Sierra Leone, Somalia, Syria, Bangladesh. These are migrants from all over the world, from these countries in varying states of emergency that are making this journey. So again, it's just crazy to see how geographically diverse these people really are. About a response, we've heard very little that we can be optimistic about. The European Commission, part of the EU, is going to have an emergency meeting on Thursday. I'm not too optimistic about what's going to happen. All they've suggested so far is that they double the manpower and the funding of search and rescue efforts. I'll point out the Italians had a really good search and rescue mission that was operational until late last year. They canceled it for funding reasons, but also because of the crazy high anti-migrant sentiment in Europe. And the EU came in with a mission that really is not fit for purpose. And even doubling it, as has been suggested, would make it still far smaller and far less effective than that former Italian mission. It's sort of a sign of the times. A whole continent pooling its resources together would not even come close to what one country had been doing, trying to take this seriously last year. So unfortunately, the suggestions I'm seeing on the table, either that search and rescue bolstering, getting the UN to actually send peacekeepers to Libya to fight these traffickers, that seems improbable. And then opening sort of refugee camps in Northern Africa, as Germany has suggested, trying to offer people an alternative to making the crossing, but in turn raising a whole lot of issues of human rights, preventing people essentially from exercising their universal human right to seek asylum where they want to leave any country freely. There doesn't seem to be a good option on the table. Hopefully that changes on Thursday, and people in the United Nations, but also in the European Commission, start to take this more seriously. But I'm not too optimistic, and that's going to mean more lives lost.
No, we will see. And let's end on a positive note. I see some of my environmentalist friends are thrilled about this decoupling between economic growth and emissions. What are you hearing?
Well, this has been the big fear, that we want countries to keep developing around the world, but they're, as it's predicted, so many places in the developing world are going to have continued, if not, increasing economic growth in the coming decades. And the real fear was that would mean emissions would necessarily rise in turn with that. We heard yesterday from the Energy Department here in the U.S. that GDP was up 2.4% last year in the U.S. That's about 0.2 higher than in 2013. What's so important is that back in 2013, when we achieved that 2.2% GDP increase, carbon emissions rose 2.5%. Not the case last year. With that 2.4% growth, only 0.7% carbon dioxide emissions increase. Bloomberg is trumpeting this as a sign of historic decoupling. And the publication, and I'll say Bloomberg is very invested in tracking emissions, so they definitely like to promote these statistics, but they have made the editorialization here that this is basically undermines that long-standing argument we've heard from the right that reining in air pollution is going to restrain economic expansion. They say, look, not only in the U.S., but around the world, we're showing that, if you put your mind to it, adopt certain policies, that you can achieve, even in the U.S., growing economic expansion at an accelerating rate without necessarily, and actually in this case, decreasing carbon emissions growth. So good news from the Energy Department yesterday. That's, I guess, as good a note as any to go out on.
There you go. Luke, I appreciate you taking time for us. Great to have you back. Always great to have you on the program.
Thanks so much. Talk to you soon.
All righty. Luke Vargas, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm John Whitehouse. Fox host Sean Hannity and Univision host Jorge Ramos misrepresented the priorities of the Latino electorate, saying that if it weren't for the issue of immigration, Hispanics would favor conservative candidates. Here's Hannity.
The vote, historically, the Latino vote has gone more towards the Democrats than Republicans.
Is it the issue of immigration?
Ramos responded.
Republicans, I think they've missed a huge opportunity because when it comes to values, they're very close to the Hispanic community. But Latinos honestly can't see beyond immigration right now because immigration reform is a prerequisite. When it comes to immigration, it seems that Jeb Bush has a better possibility of getting the Hispanic vote than Cruz and Rubio.
But this is a gross oversimplification of the priorities of the Latino electorate. A recent Pew poll found that Latino voters rank education, healthcare, jobs, and the economy as more important than immigration. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. And of course, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Its color like the tide of flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.
We see the storm out on the horizon. The clouds grow dark in the midnight sky. We feel the fire burning in the belly. The flame leaps out with an angry cry. From the underground where the night is endless, from the mine and rig where our work is done. From every plant and every nation we cry, we are many, we are one. Power, there is power in the union. Power, there is power in our hands. Power, we stand and fight together. There's power in a union of many lands.